Oh, there we go. Audio should be better. Yeah, I was muted. Yeah, you're right. You're right. Sorry, sorry. It's now fixed. I know there's a delay between what I do and the chat. You're right. Yeah. The COD. Yeah, thank you. Sorry, guys. I was muted. What's up? What's up? What's up? Hello. Oh, shit. Okay, let's fix you guys in the chat. Boom. Now you guys are with me. Hello. So we have a very special... Fuck, I'm excited, man. Especially because we have multiple videos that are either new or were released like recently, yesterday. So, and from some of our favorite creators. Big love from the UK, my G. Thank you very much. AJ Hanks. Oira, thank you so much. Principality, the Grand Principality of Nopalia. Hello, hola. And this is a video from Kraut. Kraut is one of my favorite creators, and I think one of the favorite creators of the channel in general. He uploads videos, you know, mostly related to history, and he adds his very unique point of view, which a lot of times we agree with. And yesterday he released this video, The Folly of Liberal History. I'm not entirely sure what this video is going to be. From the thumbnail, well, we can't see the thumbnail right now, but it's probably going to be related to the United Kingdom. And yeah, I am excited. You know, I think this is going to be good. Plus, we have, well, several videos from Whaitifalthist. I mean, from the past few days, he's been releasing quite a few videos. I mean, 6 days ago, 10 taboo questions about history and society, and in multiple videos. So I don't know which one we're going to watch. I don't think we should or could watch them all. And even this creator, h0ser, you know, which we've been watching for a few videos, he's released a new video too. You know, the rise and fall and future rise of Japan. So I think it's going to be, yeah, let's start with Kraut. I think it's a great way to start the stream, and I think I haven't watched this. Okay, yesterday I was sick. All right, I was sick because I had the booster shot for the vaccine, so I was totally fucked. And I really wanted to watch it, but I was nope. I'm gonna watch it on the stream. You know, this is a honest reaction for the stream. Caught a stream early for once. Yeah, man. Thank you. I don't know what time zone to use for the streams because I know most of you are located in Europe, I think. So, you know, the Mexico City time could be a little bit confusing, but yeah, thank you. Thank you all for being here. In general, so let's just pump the volume a little bit. Fourth shot already? Yeah. No, it's the third shot. In Mexico, it's a little late. Plus, when they were vaccinating my age group, the people from my age, I got COVID, you know? So I don't know if you guys remember. I had COVID like 2 months ago. So I pretty much missed the booster shot because you can't get vaccinated when you have COVID. You gotta wait like a month. So I waited 2 months instead of 1 because I was just so busy. I've been very busy lately. And yeah, it's the third shot. But I think I think places like Israel or Chile and even maybe the United States, I don't know, but they already have like the fourth shot. But anyways, I think you guys are ready. I am certainly ready. I still haven't caught COVID. Dude, that's so cool, bro.
With a few simple clicks, you can change your IP and access foreign sites and media that you would usually not have access to, or to just hide your IP from any sites or persons that may be trying
Okay, so if you guys are listening, good or bad, you know, tell me.
That works with a whole host of different platforms, and there's a 30-day money-back guarantee if you are not satisfied.
There we go.
Newly added is internet.
Oh boy, I'm excited, dude!
/Kraut and
yes, it's been 6 months. 6 months since we have watched a video of my man Kraut.
That's surfshark.deals.
You know, forget about being gay or straight or whatever, right? I am Kraut sexual. You know, that's my sexuality. Kraut sexual, dude. The folly of liberal history. There we go.
There is this story you probably heard.
It's a bit quiet.
English school kid of the English barons ruled by the incompetent King John, who forced the king into signing the Magna Carta.
That should be better.
A concession
a little better.
By the king to the rights of the barons supposedly formed the foundation from which English democracy and Anglo-American democracy in general was born. The Magna Carta holds an almost mythical and sacred position within the English-speaking political consciousness, the supposed foundation from which English liberty was unleashed upon the world and Britain came to prosper. There is, however, a problem with this narrative. 7 years after the signing of the Magna Carta...
Okay, so we're talking about the Magna Carta, but let me just raise the volume a little bit. 40, there we go. That should be better. Not quite 6 months, he made a video after the invasion of Ukraine. I think you're right. I mean, wasn't that... Yeah, no, you're right. He did made a video about... Yeah, that's true. 3 months, sorry. Yeah, no. And he actually made a video after... Yeah. So 3 months, you know, it's still...
In 1222, King Andras II of Hungary was forced to sign the Golden Bull. The Golden Bull is sometimes called the Magna Carta of Eastern Europe, but it was far more extensive in the rights and privileges that it entitled the Hungarian aristocracy to. Hungary and England basically had the same starting position in political development. But in the coming centuries, there was no Hungarian democracy and no ideal of Hungarian liberty that evolved from the Golden Bull. Instead, the Kingdom of Hungary decayed, lost power and influence, and was eventually conquered by the Ottomans. Some may blame this decay on the Mongol invasion, but this conveniently ignores the less famous Second Mongol invasion, in which the Hungarians decisively defeated the Mongols and kicked them out of Hungary. No, the reason for the decline of the Hungarian kingdom actually is the Golden Bull.
Huh. Okay.
The Hungarians were a nomadic people originating from the southern Urals, near the modern Russian-Kazakhstani border. 7 Hungarian tribes invaded Europe in the 9th century, conquered the Pannonian Basin, and used it as a base for
I love the background
the next
sound.
100 years invading, plundering, and raiding the Balkans, Greece, Germany, Italy, France, and even as far as Spain. The century known as the Hungarian Invasions, and what the Germans call Ungarnkriege, didn't end until the Holy Roman Empire defeated the Hungarian warhordes at the Battle of Lechfeld in 955, kicking the Hungarians out of the Holy Roman Empire and confining them to a sphere of influence that contained
His music choice is always good. Bro,
By the
that's
10th
so
century,
true.
the most powerful of the 7 Hungarian tribes, the Magyari, founded the Árpád dynasty, converted to Christianity, and turned the sphere of influence in the Balkans into the Kingdom of Hungary. Just as in most of Europe, warlords became aristocrats and kings, ruling over peasantry in a decentralized system of feudalism. Just like in the rest of Europe, communal lands became the property of the king, who then handed them out to aristocrats, forming the foundation of a power struggle between the king and the aristocracy. With the aristocracy gaining more estates and power, both the Hungarian and English kings were forced to sign concessions into 2 constitutional documents. There is, however, a key difference between the two. In England, the barons wished to extend their privileges and therefore forced the Magna Carta. In contrast, in Hungary, it was the royal army and the church who forced the Golden Bull to protect themselves from the barons. The Hungarian king had already been so weakened by the power the aristocracy had gained through the acquisition of estates that the army feared its own position of power. And the church in Hungary feared that the aristocracy would come for its estates and also wanted to drive out the Jews and Muslims that many Hungarian aristocrats tolerated in their lands. The fact that there were 30 Muslim villages in 12th century Hungary, as well as large Jewish communities, who were not only tolerated
30?
while the rest of Europe was consumed
That's
by
quite a
religious
lot,
zealotry
isn't
and
it?
intolerance,
30
but also
Muslim
protected when
villages.
foreign crusaders marched through Hungary on their way to Jerusalem shows just how decentralized political structures were at the time and just how powerful the regional Hungarian aristocrats were. The Hungarian state was even further weakened by the first Mongol invasion, which destroyed the army and occupied the country. Lucky for Hungary, the Mongols left after only a few years because the Great Khan died. So they had to return to the steppes to pay tribute and elect a new Great Khan. Out of fear of a Mongol return, the Hungarians rebuilt an army that successfully defeated the Mongols. However, that army was never incorporated into the state.
Just pretty cool to think that, such a big and vast empire, but the Mongols, there weren't a lot of Mongols. I mean, talking numerically. So just sending a bunch of people through such a vast empire just wasn't feasible. And then you add that the Khan died, and of course they had to go pay tribute.
The centralized Hungarian state was thereby completely weakened. The Hungarian aristocracy had no military or state obligations of service towards the king. An early parliament created by the aristocracy had so much power that the Hungarian king basically became little less than a powerless figurehead. The Hungarian aristocratic assembly even gave themselves the power to imprison the king for the welfare of the kingdom should he threaten such. Although Hungary was a centralized kingdom in name, it was basically reduced to little more than a confederacy of oligarchic barons by the 14th century. Then came the Turks. With the advancing of the Ottomans into the Balkans during the 15th century, the Hungarian state briefly rebounded. János Hunyadi, an aristocratic military leader, was made regent of the state, raised taxes, and formed what became known as the Black Army, which inflicted several defeats on the Ottomans, even kicking them out of Serbia at one point. The Hungarian Black Army managed to protect Hungary and for 50 years was basically the only thing stopping the Ottomans from just rolling into Europe. Fascinating topic. However, there are military history YouTubers who can probably cover this better. For us, what matters is that for all of its successes, rather than cementing the necessity of a centralized state, the Hungarian aristocracy resented and hated the Black Army.
Exactly, yeah. There are also massive supply issues when most Mongols live in China and Central Asia. Oh, yeah, for sure.
They hated its successes,
Sus.
they hated its commander, they hated the fact that they had to pay taxes for it, and they resented that they had to give up their own military privileges. They hated the centralized government structures needed to sustain it. So, by 1490, they called a parliament and voted to reinstate their own military privileges.
Hunyadi, well, what he said, is a very famous crusader.
Boy king on the throne, and to add a cherry on top, they cut the taxes levied on them by 80%. 4 years later, the Ottomans invaded Hungary, crushed what was left of the Black Army, killed the boy king, and conquered all of Hungary. The Hungarian aristocratic oligarchy basically destroyed their own country.
Exactly, yeah, for sure. Because, I mean, cutting the taxes that you pay, of course, that's great for you, but how are you going to fund your army, you know? And of course, the Ottomans would invade. So, they didn't seem to learn a lot from the Mongol invasion. They became even worse. So, you know,
Tax cut.
not great, but whatever.
Whig history is the idea that liberal democracy
Humanity is also a key part of the story of Dracula.
specific
Wow,
historical
blood
developments
tempest.
throughout history. It's an idea originating in England and basically claims that liberty is a concept invented by the Greeks, inherited to Rome, continued in spirit in Anglo-Saxon Britain, reinvigorated by...
Isn't it funny that a lot of people, a lot of European countries follow, they do follow a lot of what the Romans did, but they do feel like successors of Rome. I'm sure there's a lot of countries that
the Magna
say that or
Carta,
claim that.
Re-examined by Cromwell and ultimately triumphantly reborn through the Glorious Revolution, culminating in the Enlightenment and American Revolution.
In America,
I'm admittedly paraphrasing this summary in a rather uncharitable way because I find the idea ridiculous. But as ridiculous as I may make it sound, I would not be surprised if you have encountered it yourself. The idea that liberal democracy or liberalism is unavoidable, a human force of desire for freedom so powerful it will eventually overcome all odds to establish itself. That there is a specific set of political developments and stages societies undergo to achieve a liberal democratic framework.
I don't really think there are any countries today that claim to be successors. Well, yeah, I think I used the wrong words, not successor per se, like little successors.
It's a seductive
but
idea,
you know
very
what
similar to great man history, and rebranded into a sort of great
I just don't know what to
but it is ultimately wrong.
how to
On this
put
channel
it.
I have critiqued Marxist and nationalist narratives of history, but I have also often
By the way, the animation and just the country balls themselves, I think they have gotten a lot better. Don't you guys think? I mean, just the quality of like I said, the animation has gotten like a huge improvement.
Namely, every time
I mean, they've always been good. Don't get me wrong. Like, they've always been really good.
I find this to be one of the greatest flaws of liberal narratives of history, and I say this as a liberal myself. The seductive tendency to craft a narrative of freedom that places events, almost like Marx did with social classes, as necessary components in a development to liberal democracy. Because just as with Marxism, the historical record simply proves this wrong. Medieval Hungary and England both had the same political starting positions of decentralized, constitutionally limited power, but they both went entirely different directions. The English king managed to retain
on the
enough
wall.
power to build a
Who's
semi-centralized
the least stable
state,
country of them
resulting
all?
in a political struggle over compromise
And it's
in power
Hungary.
between monarchy and aristocracy. The Hungarian king lost his powers to an aristocracy that drove the kingdom off the cliff. There are more examples than merely this one as well. In 1573, while Europe was swamped in religious intolerance and wars, the Warsaw Confederation was signed in Poland. A constitution that, besides limiting the power of the king and empowering the aristocracy, also made the king an elected office and granted unparalleled religious freedoms to those residing within the Polish-Lithuanian Commonwealth. Historians have pointed out the similarities between the Warsaw Confederation and the American Constitution.
At school in the UK, the Romans are basically the beginning of history on the British Isles, as no real writing before that, and people thought it was a land of myths. That makes sense. A lot of reference in this video. True. Hola, señor. Hello, Fritos. How are you?
A century ahead of its time. But similar to Hungary, what happened was that the Polish aristocracy used their privileges to empower themselves at the expense of everyone else and weakened the central state. The Polish king became a puppet of the Polish aristocracy, and the aristocracy became corruptible to foreign influences, which helped amplify the collapse of Poland into foreign rule. The mistake made by Whig history is to view political developments from an entirely idealistic lens. The Hungarian aristocracy did not try to limit the power of the king for the humanistic benefit of all the subjects of the king, or because some ancient liberalism before liberalism. Neither did the English aristocracy.
True, you're 100% right.
Not the forerunners of a humanist struggle for freedom. They merely wanted the freedom to exploit the peasantry without interference or taxation by the king. Institutions are inherently conservative. Once established, those who establish them or work within them have an invested interest in preserving the continuation of said institutions.
Have we done any videos on Prussia?
Can come to the detriment of others.
Not many.
The preservation of such an institution is more often than not motivated out of a genuine belief in the wider...
Yeah, a big difference between England and Hungary is that also England is an island, can be crushed by neighbors as easily when it doesn't have a strong king. True. Hungary does not have that advantage. England was isolated on an island with smaller Celtic states on its borders versus Hungary being nearby Russia, Turkey, Holy Roman Empire.
The benefit of
That's
said
true. That's a huge
institution
difference.
to preserve the structures
Which
that
is
benefit those
practically what happened, right? Ottomans invaded, the Mongols invaded, and Habsburgs. You would later the Holy Roman Empire, and Hungary would always be at an influence from another
growing the
foreign
institution.
power. Well, not always,
An
but
example
a lot of
this
times.
is the rise and fall of the Republic of Venice and the Venetian trade empire. Venice was a proto-republic. It gained its independence in 810.
I love a
right at
lot
the
of
time
these
that Europe
smaller
started
Italian
to lurch
states.
out of the Dark Ages, and trade became more viable and lucrative again as a result. Being situated around islands in the middle of the Mediterranean, the Venetians were, as a seafaring people, put in an almost ideal position to conduct trade across the ocean. By the 14th century, Venice had grown to a population of 100,000, one of the largest cities in Europe, if not even the largest, the capital of all European trade. The rise to this prominent position was spectacular and built upon innovations in commerce, specifically the commenda. The commenda was a contractual trade agreement that was signed between two people. The wealthier partner provided the capital, and the other would travel with the capital to get the merchandise to assure the success of the trade. The profits of these ventures were then split between the two contract partners. In some ways, this
Smart.
was an early form of stock investment, and in Venice it became the primary means of social mobility. While the rest of Europe was spending its time in feudalism with strictly enforced and unmovable social roles, any Venetian could sign such an agreement to then acquire capital through trade. In all medieval city-states, it was the wealthy merchants who ruled the cities. These usually governed through elected early parliaments, into which the merchants elected representatives too. And what makes Venice so unique is that we see through the documentation of those representatives that more and more wealthy families of merchants continued to be established throughout the centuries. Basically, the open and inclusive economy created a social mobility that didn't exist anywhere else in Europe. Parallel to this, the political institutions of Venice were further expanded through the creation of a council of merchant representatives meant to limit the power of the elected ruler of the city, who was called the Doge.
Wait, what? There's a big Chile country ball, but it's not a country ball. It's just a thing, like a worm.
The ministerial council of magistrate representatives and a council of aristocrats who picked and nominated candidates for the office of Doge. This furthered the creation of additional political development through the creation of magistrates, bankruptcy laws, appellant courts, and the legally binding private contract. The private contract, in many ways, is a Venetian invention. These political innovations...
Because Chile is long, I'll guess, yeah, true. Elden Ring reference. I don't really play Elden Ring, so I think
its power in the 14th century,
really missed
Venice
that reference,
was a
though.
city-state with both inclusive economic and political institutions. From here on, Venice began to decline. And a key factor in that decline was the economic process of creative destruction. The social mobility guaranteed through commercial activity meant that the political and economic power of ruling families declined.
In Poland Ball comics, Kazakhstan is a brick. Yeah, I think I've seen the Kazakhstani bricks,
political tensions started to emerge. Established city elites no longer wanted to share power with or accept upcoming new wealthy Venetian families. They disliked the competition. So they expanded their powers of their own councils and introduced a police force to crack down on political dissent. By the early 1300s, political inclusivity had been stamped out, and with political power now closed within a limited and non-inclusive elite, these newly established Venetian oligarchs banned the commenda. The mechanisms of economic inclusivity were thereby destroyed. In the following decades, the Venetian oligarchy nationalized the trading companies.
Yeah, exactly. What made Venice wealthy at the beginning was now basically gone, because the aristocracy got greedy, they got jealous, I guess, of newcomers. Venice also had the disadvantage that the New World became more important in trade, and Venice was locked out of the Atlantic by Spain. True. And I was actually going to make a comment about this because what he mentioned at the beginning of this segment, talking about Venice, was that rich people would sort of not sponsor, but give money to explorers to trade, and then they would split the earnings, right? I think it works a little bit similar when talking about exploring the new world, right? Portugal, the wealthy aristocracy or wealthy people in general would sponsor the exploration trips first to Africa, then to the New World and India. And that's how the system began. So I don't know if maybe Portugal either copied this, Portugal and Spain would copy this from Venice, or it would be different because these trips were to explore, not really to trade. But yeah, either way, the New World would become important, and Venice was just a lock in the Adriatic Sea and the Mediterranean, and that's it.
Venice, effectively seizing complete
Real Life Lore made a new video available on Nebula. True, really? I'm gonna watch it. I can't.
By the Venice oligarchs, with
I can't transmit Nebula on the stream, but or can I? I don't know. I don't think so.
From here onward, Venice declined in power, wealth, and population.
And England,
throughout the coming centuries,
stunks.
While the populations of other European cities expanded, Venice was the only one that had a declining population. Stagnation and decay took hold, and Venice was reduced to little more than a plaything of other European powers. The established wealthy and powerful families of Venice didn't wish to share the institutions of wealth and power with up-and-coming families who used mechanisms of social and economic mobility to gain wealth and power. So, they destroyed the mechanisms of social and economic mobility to preserve their own institutions of power. However, thereby dooming Venice to stagnation, lack of innovation, decline, and eventually subjugation and conquest by foreign powers. What many advocates of Whig history often forget is that the people many consider to be the founding fathers of liberalism were keenly aware of the danger presented by the institution of free commerce to generate oligarchic structures that consequently undermined those very institutions. John Locke, for example, demanded that there should be a maximum income, that the unbridled hoarding of wealth represented a danger to the Commonwealth, and that therefore, at a certain point of high income, the Commonwealth ought to step in and cap and take the earnings of an individual that are deemed too much to be necessary for living and business. In 1778, the American founding father John Adams, my guy. You should react to Canadiana. It's probably one of the most underrated channels on here and one of the best. I'll check it out, brother. YouTube would probably not mind you reacting to Nebula, but the content creators definitely will if they notice you. Yeah, maybe I could try once, but yeah, I don't want this particular stream taken down, so not gonna risk it.
The aristocracy is always more sagacious than an assembly of the people collectively, or by representation, and sooner or later proves an overmatch in policy. It is always more cunning too than a first magistrate, and always makes of him a mere ceremony, unless he makes an alliance with the people to support him against it. What is the whole history of wars in Europe but one demonstration of this truth? The standing armies of Europe were all given to kings by the people, to defend them against aristocracies.
Damn.
Adams is a founding father who is widely associated with elitism and centralized federal government, together with Madison, who wrote in the federal papers,
"It is of great importance in a republic not only to guard society against the oppression of its rulers, but to guard one part of society against the injustice of the other part. Different interests necessarily exist in different classes of citizen. In a society
interesting,
under the forms of which
considering everything that's going on in America,
and oppress the weaker, anarchy may as truly be said to reign as in a state of nature, where the weaker individual is not secured against the violence of the stronger."
Both Adams and James Madison were known to have been in conflict with Jefferson.
Yeah, don't risk it.
The United States to
Could always just block out the visual part though. Not everyone here has Nebula.
Craftsmen, artisans, and traders.
It'd be cool though, but I really
ran
just don't want to risk it.
The economy by themselves for themselves. Jefferson's vision won when he beat John Adams in the presidential election of 1800, but Jefferson's dream was killed during the American industrialization of the 1860s to 1920s. That time period is today often romantically misrepresented by American libertarians as the American Golden Age. While it is true that it was a golden age of business in America, it was also the golden age of American corruption and business criminality. Unrestrained by economic regulation, what began to emerge in the 1870s were increasingly powerful corporations.
Exactly, yeah, because a lot of Carnegie and the steel companies and I think the Rockefellers came late with the oil empire, right? The oil oligarchy in the U.S., but you still had like this big, huge corporations that were monopolies. I think that's were monopolies, and people like Teddy Roosevelt will try to break those corporations because they were so massive. And again, I know that Carnegie from either steel or railroads, I don't remember what he did, and the Rockefellers, which is why the U.S. was a republic and not a democracy, true.
Increasingly monopolized their markets and strangled competition. One of the earliest examples of such is a group of men called the Associates, who founded the Pacific Railroad Company. They sold stock for a company that didn't even exist, used that money to get Leland Stanford elected governor of California, thereby guaranteeing that the California government would give preferential treatment to their company, and then just flat out bribed members of the US Congress into giving them access to 9 million acres of land to build the Pacific stretch of the Transcontinental Railroad. None of these people had any experience in building railroads. 3 of them were just failed miners and failed businessmen. A physical company in terms of laborers and a supply chain for the materials needed didn't even exist. Yet, the US government gave them $100 million, agreed to give them $16,000 per mile of railroad built on flat land, $32,000 per mile on hills, and $48,000 per mile over mountains. They then bribed the government.
That's a lot of money, though.
To write a report concluding that the lands around Sacramento, which are literally called the Flatlands, was nothing but hills and mountains, and started building their railroad there. The entire thing was a scam. The railroads were built snaking around in weird paths to make sure that as much money as possible came their way for every mile the Congress paid for. They went to the various towns on the route to make them compete in who could offer the largest bribe, or else the railroad would not go through their town. They bought up the coal mines that supplied them, but hid that in shell companies and created a scheme where they mined coal for $2 a ton, then sold it back to themselves for $6 a ton, and used the government's contract to reimburse them the remaining $4 per ton. By the time they met the Union Pacific Company route, both companies deliberately built tracks avoiding each other side by side so they could squeeze more money out of the Congress, until Congress noticed and forced them to meet and connect tracks. Once finished, the railroad executives abused their economic power, holding a monopoly over railroad transport out of the West. They hiked transport costs and fees for any goods leaving places like Arizona, Wyoming, Utah, or Nevada, unless the goods belonged to companies they owned or had partnerships with, making the entire region economically dependent upon their goods.
The USA has automatically banned you for having no money, Lamau.
You couldn't be elected governor or a congressman or even just run a successful business exporting any goods if you were not on good terms with, or in the pocket of, or had been bribed by the railroad executives. And this, in case you're wondering, is one of the main reasons why places like Arizona were economically underdeveloped and in some parts impoverished way up into the 1950s. None of the men known as the Associates had innovated or invented anything. None of them had any experience successfully running a business. In fact, most of them were failed businessmen. By any modern standards, frankly, they were con men. But these men, who made their fortunes in the 1860s, would become a more common occurrence in the United States in the decades to come, be it in oil, steel, or banking, or tobacco. The by and large almost completely unregulated market of the 19th century United States produced a set of ruthless monopolies who amassed an incredible amount of wealth and used that wealth to undermine the market for competitors and gain political power. The common term used in that time for these men was robber baron. Cornelius Vanderbilt, who monopolized railroad and steamship transportation throughout the US East and openly bragged that his economic power translated into substantial political power. John D. Rockefeller, who ruthlessly eliminated any competition to his oil businesses and managed to gain control over 88% of the United States oil industry. John Pierpont Morgan, the founder
J.P. Morgan, yeah, of course,
J.P. Morgan, who monopolized the US steel industry together with Andrew Carnegie.
Andrew Carnegie,
Rogers, an employee of Rockefeller, who founded Anaconda Copper and monopolized copper mining. or John C. Osgood, who sold his coal mining corporation to Rockefeller and is notorious for having pressured the Colorado government into sending the National Guard against striking miners and pressuring state legislators to criminalize strikes. By the 1890s, 70% of the US economy was owned by just a handful of corporations, owned by just a handful of very
people.
rich men who became the world's first billionaires. By all standards, this is what is called an oligarchy. Through some legal and public relations crafty work, their corporations became known as trusts. Yet, the year 1890 is also when the golden age of the robber barons started coming to an end, with the passing of the Sherman Antitrust Act that prohibited the forming of business cartels that undermined competition.
Business
The following
cartels.
decades saw the four antitrust presidents, movements such as the Farmers' Antitrust Movement and Progressive Movement, and journalists like Ida Tarbell who ended that era.
So let's see, who were the
four
presidents?
antitrust presidents.
We've got Teddy Roosevelt, Taft, Woodrow Wilson, surprisingly, and FDR.
Movements such as the Farmers'
It makes
Antitrust
sense. Yeah, they
Movement
were
and
all
Progressive Movement,
fairly
and
progressive,
journalists like Ida
except for
Tarbell
Woodrow
who
Wilson,
ended
really,
that
but-
era. Roosevelt used the Sherman Act to break up the interests of J.P. Morgan and bring suits against the American Tobacco Company and Rockefeller Standard Oil. His successor, William Taft, broke up Standard Oil and introduced the federal income tax. Wilson passed the Clayton Act and created the Federal Trade Commission with the stated purpose of preventing the establishment of monopolies. He in fact warned,
If monopoly exists, monopoly will always sit at the helm of government.
Wow.
I do not expect monopoly to restrain itself.
Yeah.
and
And
Franklin
he
Roosevelt
was right.
further strengthened the antitrust laws and introduced financial regulation to contain the buildup of monopolies. Farmers' movements, such as the one known as the Grangers, started
Oh yeah, totally. Yeah, being progressive back then was very different from what it means today.
elections
Really.
throughout the Midwest in protest against exploitative business practices and tariffs set on interstate commerce by the various transportation monopolies. The biggest achievement came in 1887 with the Interstate Commerce Act, which is basically the starting point of where federal government regulation of US commerce began. While journalists such as Ida Tarbell published investigative pieces like the famous The History of the Standard Oil Company, which helped turn public opinion against the trusts. In contrast to our times, in which giant corporations are seen as too big to fail, the prevailing attitude from the 1890s to the 1930s was that corporations could become too big to be allowed to exist. Civil society regarded them as a threat to economic and also to civil liberties, and therefore threw their weight behind legislation.
Okay, so a lot of corporations now are deemed too big to fail in the sense, and I think, and if you guys know more about this, maybe correct me if I'm wrong, but they are deemed too big to fail because, well, they shouldn't fail because when someone, let's say, Morgan Stanley, what was the company that failed in 2008? Was it Lehman Brothers in the United States that caused the whole economic crisis in 2008? I forgot the mortgage, the subprime mortgage crisis. It causes sort of a domino effect. When a huge company fails, a bunch of other companies start failing. People lose their jobs, they can't pay their bills, and it just becomes a huge crisis. So,
legislation to limit their growth and power. There are two main points I would like you to consider
Yeah, I
and
guess-
discuss from
well,
this video.
let's hear.
First, Whig history is bunk. The idea that there is a natural path or progression of humanity or a specific peoples into liberal democracy or liberty is simply not true. As we have seen with the examples of Hungary and Venice, political structures that grant liberties can just as well be hijacked by forces that will abuse these powers to undermine those liberties for others. As tempting as it may be to see the history of humanity as a process of political progression, this is simply not the case. Liberties are far more fragile than many may first assume, and a society does not naturally progress into liberty through fulfilling certain stages in political development. Second, economic liberty is no guarantor of political liberty. As we saw in the example of Venice, where social mobility and political rights of participation were deeply tied to economic status and wealth, monopolies can still be formed to undermine what is seen as competition, both in economy and political. The example of the 19th century United States clearly outlines how unrestrained markets can create economic power structures that not only threaten economic liberty, but civil liberties. In a time in which open markets to countries like China and Saudi Arabia have failed to produce any substantial civil liberties in those places, and when the world's largest businesses are considered to be too big to fail, it may be worth remembering that the United States underwent a period in its political development of breaking up monopoly to guarantee market freedom and civil liberties. At the end of this video, I wanted to thank you, especially the patrons and channel members, for your patience. 2 months ago, I had an accident with a deep fryer that left me with some rather big oil burns covering much of my right arm and my chest. The injuries left me in a position where I couldn't work for more than a month, and is the reason why most of the artwork in this video was not drawn by me. I am very grateful to the artists I hired for drawing 90% of this video while I was recovering. And just as my burns finally started to heal, I caught a really nasty case of COVID and also had to deal with some unfortunate private issues. In total, I must have lost around 2 months worth of work time, and I'm very grateful to all of you for not losing your patience with me and giving me the time to get through this mess while I couldn't work on a video. I'm hoping to get right back into the normal schedule of work and to bring a new video for you very soon. And finally,
Yes.
I wanted to give a special shout out and thank you to the Korean artist Teabag. Teabag has been one of the best artists I have hired for more than a year to draw art for many of my videos. He has not just been a great artist, but also a great teacher, giving me tips on how to draw and become a better artist myself. You
cute.
probably noticed how my art style...
The artwork on this video were very, very good. Yeah, true. Basically, Singapore in a nutshell, economic delivery without political level. True. The way Singapore works is just very weird. True, excellent art. Yeah, it was amazing. That explains it. Actually, I saw him on Twitter talking about him being behind schedule. I think I saw it on Instagram. You know, I follow Kraut on Instagram, and I think I saw when he caught COVID, you know, and I was like, okay, his video is going to be late.
Over the course of the videos I made. Teabag received a letter from the Korean government recently informing him that he was going to get drafted into the Korean military to do his 2 years of mandatory service. As such, I have to say goodbye and thank you. When you come back in 2 years and want to do some drawing work again, we will be open for you and waiting for you. And yes, that's a we, not just me, because it's not just me saying thank you and wishing you all the best, but everyone in our small little group of creators and friends that formed over the last 2 years.
Hey, Teabag, I just wanted to say a few things before you do go into
No, and even
and I
us.
just want to wish you all the best. You've been a great friend for the past 18 months or so since I've known you, and I know it's probably going to be tough for you. And I just want to let you know that a lot of us are going to miss you in this period, but we are certainly looking forward to speaking to you once you're finally out of service on the other side. Take care, Teabag. I'm sure you'll be fine, and I can't wait to speak to you again one day, my friend.
Thank you for all your hard work, and I wish you all the best.
Okay, so this is like a message of all the...
Hey, Teabag, it's me, Flying Tongue.
So yeah, this is just a huge message for the guy. Okay, well. I mean, that's nice. That's wholesome, right? Can't blame the guy for... I mean, going 2 years for a military service, and it sounds pretty strict because, again, he's going to be far away from his computer, so that sounds pretty horrible. I mean, Korea, well, I mean, it makes sense, right? That's South Korea, come on. But damn, this video was pretty good. Sort of a history of liberal history. What do you guys think? Yeah, rough. Oof. Guys, like, I can't imagine doing 2 years of a very strict, hardcore military there, because there is, I guess it's technically mandatory military service in Mexico, but there are ways around it, you know. I personally didn't do my military service. Sorry, government, you know, sorry, CIA. Well, it's not the CIA because it's in Mexico, but... Okay, so should we watch real-life lore now? And I think this video is pretty interesting, you know, why the war in Ukraine is causing a apocalyptic famine. Apocalyptic. Holy fuck. They're debating reintroducing conscription in Germany. Oh, dude. That's kind of weird, isn't it? I mean, I know Germany now is good, but I don't know. It's just I don't know how to describe it, guys, but it's kind of, I mean, it makes sense because of Russia, but it's kind of weird. You know, it just gives you the feeling that something is wrong when you read something like they're debating reintroducing conscription in Germany. Real life lore sounds interesting. Might be similar to Polymatter's video on the crisis on Sri Lanka. Germany wants to make a big army. As a French, it scares me. True. I mean, France, Belgium, Netherlands, Poland. Probably they might be a little bit against me. So it reminds me of the debate that happened with German reunification, right? So in the 1990s, people were a little bit scared, well, pretty scared about Germany being reunified, right? And I think it was like Margaret Thatcher, the British Prime Minister at the time, who was like, okay, it's kind of sus that Germany is trying to reunify. Personally, I'm exempt from the UK draft as an autistic. Really? I think a lot of people are exempt for things like that or for wearing glasses, for example. I think in the United States, I think, maybe I could be wrong, but wearing glasses, depending on what kind of glasses, gets you exempt. So anyways, I would probably not be great at the military anyways. So yeah, let's watch real life lore. A lot of you know, it got me curious in Nebula that he released a new video. Oh yeah, nice. So the Transnistria war between Moldova, Ukraine, the Transnistria, which is like it's not independent, but it's like a region looking for independence in Moldova. A lot of people in France, a lot of French people were anti-reunification. I love Germany so much that I want two of them. Yeah. I get that. You know, that would make a lot of sense. Oh, yeah. Aren't there also minimum IQ tests? Maybe that's just the US and Europe doesn't have them. I think I've heard that. I think that's true. At least in some countries, there could be some IQ tests.
This video was made possible by Curiosity Stream and Nebula. Watch another brand new episode in my monthly, ongoing modern conflict series on Nebula that covers the many recent wars and conflicts of the 21st century, with 15 full-length episodes already uploaded ranging from Russia's many conflicts.
I mean, being completely honest, his Nebula videos are pretty good, you know?
In Ukraine, Transnistria, Georgia, and Chechnya, to the US-Iran conflict, Greece-Turkey conflict, and many more, with brand new episodes coming out every...
Well, yeah, dude, we get it. So I think because, you know, right now we're talking about the war between Russia and Ukraine, and I think Russia, it's one of the largest producers of what's this thing called in English? I don't remember the name in English, but something important when it comes to farming, right? A material to help the crops. So I think that's part of it, but I don't know if he's going to talk about something else. Fertilizer, yeah, that's right, fertilizer, right? I think Russia is the largest fertilizer producer. So it's pretty scary.
/real life.
Because, I mean, oil is one thing, but food, I mean, probably the most essential human product other than water.
This is David Beasley. He's the man who currently runs
the
United Nations World
Food
Program, the largest humanitarian organization in the world that is focused on global hunger and food security. Listen to what he has to say during this speech back from February of 2022, while speaking about impoverished countries around the world.
Okay.
So these are the countries that are struggling in such a way that if we do not address immediately over the next 9 months, we will see famine, we will see destabilization of nations like you are already seeing in certain places like in the Sahel, and third, you'll see mass migration. And I can tell you from experience, we've got the solutions, we've got the programs, we need the money and the follow through. Otherwise, nations around the world will pay for it 1,000-fold.
Mr. Beasley was commenting on a global food supply problem back in February of 2022 that was already in a very bad shape for a very long list of reasons. In China, a series of catastrophic floods across the previous summer in 2021 damaged more than 30 million acres of farmland across the country.
It's just pretty rough. The wheat situation is also, it also sucks for countries like Egypt that import a lot of food. True, a lot of the North African countries in general, a lot of Middle Eastern countries, even places like Mexico. I think Mexico imports also a lot of its food.
Leading the Chinese agricultural
So, yeah,
minister to
I'm
announce
fucked.
that their winter crop yield could end up becoming the worst in history. The La Nina meteorological condition over the Pacific Ocean that began back in 2020 was persisting into an unusually long third year, bringing less precipitation than usual across the American West and dramatically exacerbating the already worst drought that the region has seen anytime in the past 1,200 years, from California to western Kansas, and seriously negatively impacting U.S. agricultural output in the process. Eastern Africa is currently experiencing the most severe drought there of at least the past 40 years. In August, the Taliban's recapture of the government in Afghanistan had plunged the country into an even worse food security situation as financial sanctions from the West began to bite, while internal civil wars continued to rage across many of the countries in the Middle East, from Syria to Yemen, negatively impacting their citizens' abilities to acquire food. Back in 2020, in the capital and biggest port of Lebanon, Beirut, a catastrophic
explosion?
warehouse
Yeah.
explosion took out most of the country's huge grain silos, leaving the country without any ability to store large amounts of grain and forcing them to become heavily reliant upon regular grain shipments coming in by sea instead, largely from Ukraine and Russia. And the lingering supply chain bottlenecks of the
no.
COVID-19 pandemic were still hampering the world's ability to ship products, including food. Largely because of all these issues, the numbers of people around the world whose access to food is so poor that it directly threatens their livelihood increased by nearly 80% over just the past 5 years,
Holy
from 108 million
shit.
people to 193 million. So, as you can see, the global supply chain of food was already under a lot of stress when Mr. Beasley publicly announced his warnings of famine, instability,
And that was before the
mass
war.
migrations around the world over the next 9 months at the Munich Security Conference on the 18th of February, 2022. And then, just 6 days after those warnings were made, Vladimir Putin ordered nearly 200,000 Russian soldiers to invade Ukraine, and the global food situation immediately went from bad to absolutely catastrophic. Before the invasion began, Ukraine was among the world's most significant agricultural powerhouses, ranking 5th in global wheat exports, 3rd in barley exports, 3rd in corn exports, and 1st in oilseed exports. Blessed with an abundance of some of the richest and most fertile black soils found anywhere in the world, across the vast Eurasian steppe that spans throughout southern Ukraine and Russia, these two countries have been among the world's top agricultural powerhouses for hundreds of years. Ukraine alone provides nearly 9
What I don't get is why lamb is so expensive here in Wales when we have more sheep than humans here. True, I mean, I don't eat a lot of lamb. In fact, I don't remember when was the last time I ate lamb, but I don't get it. Yeah, particularly when you guys have a lot of sheep. Oops, I'm a little late. No, you're good. I mean, you missed the Kraut video, which was pretty good, but I think you're extremely early for this one.
9% of all the wheat that's traded in the world. And
Yeah.
when combined, the
But yeah,
food
and it's not only about fertilizer, it's also about wheat.
that is grown upon these rich fields in both Ukraine and Russia supply nearly 30% of all the wheat that is traded across the world.
Wow.
20% of the traded corn, 75% of all the traded sunflower
Wow.
oil, and nearly 1/8 of all the calories that are traded globally.
Holy. Okay, yeah, I mean, Russia, controls 1/9 or 1/10 of the global land? It simply makes sense that they are going to export a lot of food. And again, it's not only about the food. I think the fertilizers also play a huge role on this whole ordeal. So in reality, it's a massive problem, right? So Russia is sanctioned. Now they're going to sanction back. Plus, when Russia faces economic issues, they are going to struggle to just produce food. So this is not only about the sanctions, it's just about Russia's struggles, economic struggles to produce that food and export it. And yeah, it's not gonna be good. Damn, yeah. Jesus, what is sunflower oil used for? I think cooking, right? And probably more foods. Well, hold up. Let's just Google, right? Sunflower oil uses. It's for roasting. Yeah, mostly for cooking and frying, right? So I think most cooking oil, right, like the oil that we use in our kitchens to fry and like cook stuff, I think that's mostly sunflower oil. Yeah, cooking. 30%, 30 plus percent of Egyptians below the poverty line. And what does that regimen do? 45 billion on a smart city. Oh, well, yeah, I heard that. Probably not a great decision in the desert, which has little public transportation in a park. Yeah, that's probably not the best idea. In France, for some weeks, there was no sunflower oil because of that. Oh shit! So it's already struggling. Well, yeah, I would imagine that.
An overwhelming
Jesus.
percentage of these calories are usually delivered by cargo ship
That's a lot
across the
more than
Black
I
Sea
thought, yeah.
and through the
Amen.
Turkish Straits towards countries across the Middle East, North Africa, and Eastern Africa, where the environment is significantly more arid on average. The soils are of lower quality, and the widespread production of crops is therefore more challenging.
Yeah.
Egypt alone is the world's single largest importer of wheat, with a hungry population of more than 100 million
yeah,
people
you were
who
talking
largely
about
all
that.
live immediately within the narrow oasis that the Nile River carves across the barren Sahara Desert. As a result,
Holy shit, guys, this is pretty serious. I mean, geez, I knew it was bad. I knew the fertilizer situation, but just overall, the wheat and sunflower oil situations are pretty fucked up, guys. This is why you should prepare, stock up on food. I mean, I don't want to be fear mongering, but I think, yeah, we should probably start stocking up food. Plant oil was rationed in Germany until a few weeks ago as well. Wow. That's
Egypt has one
scary
of
as
the
hell.
lowest ratios of arable land
So it's
to
over
people
for
in the
African
world,
bros.
with even
Huh.
less arable
Yeah,
land
pretty
overall
much.
than Serbia, a country with nearly 15 times less people, which ultimately means that, inevitably, Egypt is a country that is heavily reliant upon importing food from other countries. The primary food staple within Egypt is bread, which accounts for roughly 30% of all the calories that are consumed by Egyptian citizens. This means that the country consumes around 21 million tons of wheat per year, and 62% of all that wheat is imported from abroad. And the overwhelming majority of that imported wheat, roughly 82% of it, all comes from just the rich black soil fields found across Ukraine and Russia. And Egypt is far from alone in this high level of dependence on food coming
Turkey,
from around the Black
Iran,
Sea.
Libya,
The rich fields of Ukraine and Russia ordinarily
Lebanon.
supply 81% of Lebanon's imported wheat, 79% of Turkey's imported wheat, and significantly high amounts of imported wheat across the Middle East, North Africa, and Eastern Africa. This is one of the world's most crucial trade relationships.
I'm late. Did I miss anything? You only missed the Kraut video. So, well, I mean, it was pretty good, not gonna lie, but you're still pretty early in the stream, I'd say. A shortage of oil around the world. Indonesia exported 53.5% of palm oil. Banned exporting palm oil a while back. Isn't that one of the things they make Nutella with? No, I think that's other oil. But it's still pretty huge.
That is
Damn.
entirely defined
Yeah,
by
we're
geography.
gonna-
And it is very difficult for any of these countries who receive large amounts of Black Sea grains to find economic alternative suppliers. Other rich and fertile agricultural areas in the world, like Western Europe, Canada, the United States, Brazil, India, or China, are all significantly further away and have their own geographically determined trade routes already
Yeah.
going on. And so, sending any grains from these regions to the Middle East or North Africa would consequently take longer and be more expensive when compared with the
I mean, they could send them from India, right? I mean, that's pretty close. Yeah, they could send them from India, especially in places like the United Arab Emirates or Oman. So yeah, it's not that hard. Come on.
Middle East or North Africa would consequently take longer and be more expensive when compared with the closer by fields of Ukraine and Russia. Within Ukraine itself, these were the provinces.
Yeah, and exactly like you just said, Yemen is probably the most affected country by this conflict, not only because they are, a Middle Eastern country with little food, but because they've been fighting a war. So again, places like the United Arab Emirates, they can import food from places that are farther away. But poor countries that are especially fighting a war, they are going to be the ones that struggle the most. So think about the poorest nations in the region, for example, maybe Syria. Maybe Egypt is not at war, but Egypt is a very poor place. And those are the places that are going to be struggling the most.
That produced the most of that hugely important food supply that fed some 400 million people around the world in the years immediately prior to the invasion.
That's a lot of people, dude. That's a lot of people.
And western portions of the country. However, these are largely the exact same areas of the country that have seen the most intense levels of fighting since the Russians invaded back in February. At present, nearly 1/3 of Ukraine's rich farmland is either directly beneath Russian military occupation or has been bombed or mined so severe.
Nutella is a lazy person's chocolate. How do people decide to spread sugar in toast for breakfast? I'll never get it. I mean, I kind of agree with you. I don't like Nutella because it's unhealthy. I mean, it's almost like poison. But I guess so. I mean, I guess it's kind of lazy. I don't know.
That it's no longer considered
it's just so
safe for
unhealthy,
farming.
dude.
And so to say that the war has disrupted Ukraine's usual agricultural productivity would be an absurd understatement.
Yeah.
The war has absolutely crippled Ukraine's ability to produce and export their usual crops. For example, the vast majority of Ukraine's wheat crop is winter wheat that is planted during the autumn months between September and November, and then ordinarily harvested during June and July the following year. This entire wheat crop within Ukraine that was planted last year is therefore supposed to be being harvested right now. But half of those winter wheat fields are currently beneath Russian military occupation, or still being actively fought over, which ultimately means that a lot of the usual harvesting of this wheat crop isn't going to happen at all this year. And then, only to make matters even more severe, even if the Ukrainian farmers were somehow miraculously capable of harvesting all of their crops this year, they simply don't really have anywhere to store it because all of Ukraine's grain silos are nearing maximum capacity since they're still storing an enormous amount of grain from the previous harvest from before the war began. Some 25 million tons of grain, the majority of it corn, is still stuck within the grain silos around the port of Odessa in the southwest.
Yeah, because that's the thing, right? The Russians captured the port of Odessa. So, really, do they? I think Russia's in control of Odessa, right? So, yeah, I mean, even if they could farm their materials, they wouldn't be able to send them or ship them.
Primary export hub where, ordinarily, some 98...
Nutella on toast with banana slices. It's the devil's greatest weapon. Oh, no, they didn't capture Odessa? No. Oh, okay, gotcha. Russia doesn't have Odessa. Okay, gotcha. Russia retreating from Snake Island makes it possible to export. Not sure if it'll be enough. Not mentioned yet, but there are too many naval mines. Okay. Oh, they blockade. Okay, so yeah, they haven't captured Odessa, but there's a naval blockade. Okay.
8% of Ukrainians' exported grains are shipped from out towards global markets. However, in combination with the military occupation and fighting over much of Ukraine's agricultural land in the southeast and
Hello, Gustav.
south,
how are you
the Russian
doing?
Navy has been actively blockading
Oh, they
the
have
remaining
only
Ukrainian
captured up to
coastline,
Crimea.
still under
Okay.
Ukrainian government control in the southwest that includes the all-important port of Odessa.
Okay, there we go. Okay, so this big island on the right is Crimea, I imagine, I think. So this is what Russia has captured. They haven't captured Odessa. But there we go. What you were talking about, it's a naval blockade.
And the Russians right now aren't letting anything
Perfect
through
timing.
it. In addition to that, fearful of an eventual Russian D-Day style amphibious assault on the beaches near to Odessa.
Oh, what? It's not a. Yeah, it's what? I mean, it's not. Yeah, it's not an island.
The
You're
Ukrainians
right.
have planted an enormous
I don't know what I was
amount
gonna
of
say.
naval mines within the waters immediately around Odessa to deter them. But both of these factors combined mean that Ukraine isn't capable of exporting any of their usual crops out to the global market, even if they...
And all of this struggle, not only for Ukraine and Europe, but the fucking world, just because Putin is fucking insane, you know? I just gotta feel bad because this is probably one of the stupidest wars, probably in history, especially late history, you know?
Were harvesting all of their crops, which means that tens of millions of tons
It's a
of
peninsula,
food stored
gotcha.
in Odessa's grain silos are likely going to begin rotting. And the next crop that is supposed to be being harvested right now will likely also rot to nothing.
No.
It's quite possible that Ukraine's total exports of food this year, which are usually in the top 5 globally, will end up being
Why can't Ukraine export via land borders? That's a good question. Here's my thoughts, and I don't know if I'm correct, but you know, you just can't carry the same amount via land. You know, you just can't carry that much containers via land. You know, trains can carry some containers, but not as much as a big ship. You know, so I think that's the biggest reason. But I know maybe there's other logistical issues. You know. Because I drunk Soviet Union leader give Crimea to Ukraine for no reason at all. I think the Crimean War was the most stupid one in history. True, you know, both of those are really stupid. Russia's also taking large amounts of wheat from the east. Cash, you know, Russia's just fucking horrible. All of this to revel the glory of the Soviet Union. Yeah.
effectively zero, and the country could end up becoming a net importer of food this year instead if the war gets bad enough. This all on its own could end up taking out roughly 5% of all the traded calories in the world during a normal year. Oh my god,
dude, 5%, that's so fucking,
right now with the global
that's
food
so
supply,
much.
will have disastrous consequences that will reverberate across the entire world, but will be felt most severely across Ukraine's normal grain export destinations in the Middle East, North Africa, and Eastern Africa. Now, obviously, one of the biggest problems creating this whole situation is the ongoing Russian blockade.
There we go. I'm from Bulgaria. You can't take the wheat with rail, but where? The ports in Romania and Bulgaria don't have the capacity to export it. True, really funny story. And it's all that wheat for their new Russian burger buns. Scary times, man. True. Probably the scariest times in late history.
Southwestern.
And by the way, we are 21 viewers at this moment. Well, between 19 and 22. But either way, thank you guys so much. It's fucking awesome,
Odessa,
dude.
which isn't allowing any of Ukraine's agricultural
Also, the ports in
exports
Romania,
to leave
Bulgaria,
from
and the Black
port.
Sea.
And to make matters even still worse, the Joint War Committee of Lloyd's Insurance, one of the largest maritime shipping insurance companies in the world, has now labeled the entire Ukrainian coast and northern Black Sea a region of, quote, high risk, which basically means that insurance premiums for cargo ships operating within this area right now are sky high. In order to get around the blockade and the insurance issues, there have been some proposals made to reroute a lot of Ukraine's agricultural products from maritime shipping out of Odessa towards overland shipments by rail and truck towards the European Union, and over to other maritime ports in Romania, Bulgaria, Poland, or the Baltic states. But there's a number of problems with this idea. First of all, most of the European Union and Ukraine use different rail gauges for their railroads, which creates a man-made choke point for rail-based trade at the Ukrainian-EU border. Ukraine's entire infrastructure has been built out over decades to get their grain down to ports on the Black Sea to ship out by container vessel, and shipping it out over land to the European Union will simply not be as efficient or quick. Therefore, even the most optimistic of planners expect that the Ukrainians won't be able to get any more than 20% of their usual global grain exports out to the EU by land using rail and trucks. The vast majority of Ukraine's grain can only get out by sea through Ukraine's own ports on the Black Sea and through the Turkish Straits. But how can this be done with a Russian naval blockade? This problem has led Lithuania, a NATO and European Union member state today, an ex-Soviet republic of the past, to propose a second and far more dangerous option. They have proposed forming what they call a naval coalition of the willing, an alliance of nations that will send armed ships into the Black Sea to safely.
You're right, though. We are just predicting the video now. I love it. Also, the ports in Romania, Bulgaria are in the Black Sea. They could try, this was in Poland, though, but that might be risky. This is kind of off topic, but Crusader fanboys should get a hobby It was pretty random, bro, but I guess I agree.
safely escort Ukrainian merchant ships carrying the all-important grain through the Russian blockade and out to world markets.
And this is
while
dangerous,
risky,
yeah.
such an action would have some historical precedent. During the Iran-Iraq War throughout the 1980s, the United States Navy carried out the largest convoy operation since the Second World War when it agreed to escort Kuwaiti oil tankers through the maelstrom of the war-torn Persian Gulf so that their enormous oil resources would continue reaching the global market. However, that operation was rife with controversy. American escort vessels were struck routinely by both Iraqi and Iranian ordnance that almost brought the United States formally into the conflict. And then, in 1988, one of these American warships misidentified an Iranian passenger jet that was still flying within Iranian airspace and fired a missile at it that shot the plane down, killing all 290 civilians who were on board, an action that the US government, still to this day, has never formally apologized for or acknowledged any responsibility over. If the United States carried out a similar operation today within the Black Sea, similar accidents and misunderstandings can happen, except the difference this time is that unlike Iran, Russia is the world's largest.
And Russia is a nuclear power. Yeah. Cuban missile crisis in the Black Sea. Yeah, exactly, pretty much. But that will be war. Yep.
Largest nuclear power.
It's
with at least 1,500 nuclear long-range missiles ready to fire at a moment's notice. Moreover, the Russians have an absolute arsenal of anti-ship and area denial capabilities, with their numerous weapon systems stationed within the Crimean Peninsula, enabling them to effectively dominate the waters of the Black Sea from the land. Any Allied ships escorting Ukrainian merchant vessels out of Odessa have to be prepared to potentially come under fire from the Russians for violating their blockade. And in that event, the Allied ships must be willing to return fire or the entire operation is pointless. But if they—
And that's war. That is pretty much war, you know? I hate Putin now, man. Yeah. I've never been a fan of Putin, but this was just the straw that broke the camel's back.
Do return fire, that leads to a direct military confrontation between themselves and the Russians, with uncertain but potentially catastrophic risks of escalation even further. And then there's still the fact that the Ukrainians have mined the hell out of the waters around Odessa themselves. If the convoys are going to be successful, Ukraine will have to remove most of those mines. But they aren't likely to do that because doing so would free up the amphibious invasion path for the Russians towards Odessa. The Ukrainian government has offered that they would be willing to remove the mines if the West provided them with long-range anti-ship missiles, but that remains to be seen if it'll actually happen or not. In many ways, the problem with Allied convoys escorting Ukrainian merchant ships across the Black Sea is very similar to the debate on declaring a no-fly zone over Ukraine's airspace. Is this ultimately an issue that NATO is willing to risk a direct war with Russia over? And, like the no-fly zone, the answer so far—
Are we appeasing Russia? You know, it sounds a little bit, not quite like appeasement back in pre-World War II times, but it sounds a little bit similar, right? Nobody wants to risk it. Nobody wants to risk war or conflict with Russia. Of course, because there's nuclear weapons, and that's a huge thing that we gotta consider. But it does sound a little bit like we are not willing to try anything just because we are so fearful of wars. And maybe you guys that are in Europe might be a lot more cautious, right? Like, hey man, I live in Romania, Bulgaria, or even other places like the UK. Like, I don't want to risk it, but I don't know, man. We should try something, you know, like at least a thing, something. In Germany, it's basically the far right and the far left that are against sending weapons and stuff. Interesting. It's also a war of time. The more this goes on, the more economic and political problems there will be in the West. The governments of Bulgaria already failed this week. Political shenanigans during war. True, and I think there were also elections in the UK, weren't they? Like a week ago or a few days ago? Maybe like local elections. And also, you're right. It is a war of time. I think I read the other day that Russia defaulted on its debt. Like they couldn't pay that day its foreign debt, its foreign debt payment. So that's pretty huge too. That's pretty huge news. So it just we'll see. We'll have to see who survives at the end.
Has been a resounding no. And moreover, even if they did agree to help out by
personally
sending
doubt
in
Russia
the armed
will use
convoys,
nukes,
the West
as it
is
would mean the end of
severely
humanity.
limited in their legal
I don't know,
abilities
man.
to
Putin
send
is
warships
crazy.
into the Black Sea because of Turkey's own control over the Dardanelles and the Bosphorus, the strategic gates between the Mediterranean and Black Seas that they have controlled for centuries, and through which access is highly regulated by the 1936-era treaty known as the Montreux Convention. Under that treaty, Turkey is enabled to control the passage of warships through the straits during times of war. And so on the 28th of February, just 4 days after the Russians invaded Ukraine, the Turks invoked Article 19 of the Montreux Convention, which blocked the passage of all warships through the straits that belonged to belligerent states, which, for the moment, has most severely affected the Russians. On the 14th of April, Ukrainian forces fired two anti-ship missiles that struck the flagship of the Russian Black Sea Fleet, the Moskva, which led to its sinking shortly afterwards. This was a moment of immense historical significance, because it marked not only the largest warship ever sunk during wartime since the Second World War, but also the first time that the Russian Navy itself had lost a flagship in over a century since the Russo-Japanese War of 1905.
Wow.
And because of the Turks' invocation of Article 19, the Russians are presently legally prohibited from sending in any replacements for the Moskva or any other naval casualties they suffer into the Black Sea. And so their losses there are effectively irreplaceable right now. This is an obvious blow to Moscow, but Turkey has been playing both sides of this conflict since the very beginning. The Turks have informally requested that all other countries not send...
there were elections in the UK by seats where MPs have resigned. Oh, okay, gotcha, yeah. Did you hear that Turkey said they would not veto Sweden and Finland joining NATO anymore? Yeah, I heard that. That's awesome, man. The Russo-Japanese and its Russian naval expedition is a very funny story as well. If only Ukraine had kept its nukes, yeah, man, it would have been so much different. Turkey also got a blank check for Syria by allowing Sweden and Finland to join NATO.
Any warships into the Black Sea as well.
I just really hope
while it hasn't
that
happened yet,
they do
Turkey
join NATO.
is theoretically enabled under Article 21 of the Montreux Convention to officially completely shut down their gates into the Black Sea to all nations' warships if their government only claims threats of imminent danger and war.
Damn.
Turkey effectively possesses the legal right to deny Allied convoys into the Black Sea if they felt like it. And even if they didn't, the Montreux Convention also restricts the numbers of warships that non-Black Sea coastal states may send into the Black Sea anyway, and how long they're allowed to stay there. And thus, even if Turkey was on board with the whole convoy operation, NATO allies from outside of the Black Sea, like the United States or United Kingdom, would have to frequently rotate their own ships in and out of it. On the other hand, the Turkish Navy itself isn't bound by any of these legal restrictions through their own gates, which is why many have called for the Turks to be the ones to lead the convoy operation in Ukraine. But despite being a member state of NATO, it's usually quite difficult to predict in which direction Turkey's present government will go during a crisis like this, because their dealings with the West, Ukraine, and Russia have all been fairly ambiguous at best. On the one hand, Turkey has sold dozens of their highly effective combat drones to the Ukrainian military in their fight against Russia, while on the other hand, they've refused to implement any financial sanctions upon Russia, and they continue to allow many of the Russian oligarchs to park their super yachts safely within Turkish territorial waters. Turkey has purchased advanced...
which, by the way, like Turkey is part of NATO, right? Like, why are they playing both sides? I mean, I get it from a government perspective, but it's just really sad. It's a waste of potential. Ukraine never had the money to build missile silos to launch their nukes when they had them. Plus, they also didn't have the codes, right? So, yeah, there we go. Like, even if Ukraine had kept their nukes, I wouldn't have the launch codes, yeah. Please watch Blue Jay's video on the Russian expedition to Japan. It's hilarious. Sure, dude, we can watch it. Maybe even today, right now. To be fair to Turkey, they are in financial crisis and can't afford sanctions. True, I've been reading about Turkish lira and how it's not
S-400
doing well.
missile systems from the Russians in the past and incurred American financial sanctions in response. The Turks have allowed the Russians to build out 2 natural gas pipelines across the Black Sea and their own territory that grants Moscow a further ability to route their natural gas supplies around Ukraine. But then, at the same time, Turkey and Russia have supported opposite sides during the Armenia-Azerbaijan war in 2020, as well as opposite sides during the Syrian and Libyan civil wars further away from home. Ultimately, Turkey pursues whatever policy is within Turkey's own better interests at the moment.
That's
And
pretty much
despite
it.
being a member of NATO, they'll cooperate with the Russians whenever it suits them, and they'll cooperate with NATO whenever it suits them. And when it comes to convoys and NATO warships operating in
Not
support of
based.
the Ukrainians within
Not
the Black
based.
Sea, it remains to be seen which side they would ultimately land on. This is all ultimately why there really aren't any good solutions to fix
Oh, wait, it's Turkey. Well, whatever it's pronounced. But yeah, nobody cares, dude.
this
Like,
looming
it's
global
Turkey.
starvation problem coming from around the Black Sea. The West blames the Russians for engineering the crisis, while the Russians are blaming the West for imposing sanctions upon them. Moscow has offered to loosen up the blockade and allow the Ukrainian grain shipments to continue in exchange for the West relenting on their financial sanctions, which they've so far refused to do, accusing the Russians of holding the Ukrainian food as a hostage in the negotiations.
I did kickboxing
Antonio
class yesterday
Guterres,
and my
the
legs
current
hurt
serving
like
United
hell.
Nations
That's
Secretary
cool,
General,
man.
has stated his opinion that a compromise should be made wherein the Russians agree to lift the blockade in exchange for the West relenting on many of the sanctions that have been placed on Russian and Belarusian fertilizer products. But to be honest, that seems pretty unlikely because as the Russian army continues to struggle and fails to make any big gains on the Ukrainian battlefield, their shifting strategy towards economic warfare is only likely to continue. The blockade of Ukraine's ports, from the perspective of Moscow, is generally intended to strangle the Ukrainian economy into submission by simultaneously blocking their exports from leaving and blocking most imports of weapons, food, and cash from entering by sea. The side effect of this blockade preventing critical food shipments from reaching hungry countries across the Middle East, North Africa, and Eastern Africa is, if anything, a bonus to the Kremlin's greater geopolitical objectives. Because the massive levels of instability that it's going to cause in all of these places has the very high potential to trigger another round of revolutions and mass migration that is likely headed straight in the direction of
Europe.
the European Union, just like during 2015, since Europe has already
So, yeah, you know Putin can't use nuclear weapons unless his officers authorize it. That's good. That's good. Because you would hope that some of those officers are at least not as crazy, you know? Here's to hoping that Ukraine will be an effective reality check for the European states at large. Not likely, sadly. True. Did you ever notice how the island of Crete is a mini version of the island of Java? I hadn't noticed, but it's true. I don't know, guys. What do you guys think? I mean, do you guys think there should be a compromise? Because I don't know. I honestly don't know what would be best. I would love to punish Russia as severely as we can, and the economic sanctions are doing a good job. Like I said before, Russia is not paying their debt right now. That's important. That's big, all right, and that's caused mostly by the sanctions. But at the same time, like this is affecting third parties, poor African and Middle Eastern nations that don't have the ability to feed themselves. So what do? Do you have a global crisis that's going to create all sorts of problems? Poverty, war, revolution, migration. Or you let Russia a little bit off the hook and you take some sanctions out? The problem is that the EU doesn't have a coherent foreign policy. I would imagine that. I don't know. It's just a really messed up situation.
already taken in nearly 8 million refugees now fleeing from the war in Ukraine since
8
the war
million.
began. Millions of additional refugees coming to the continent from the Middle East and North Africa will inevitably become politically turbulent.
Oh, yeah.
And this is almost certainly what Putin and the Kremlin are actually banking on. They have
That's what
no
they want.
geopolitical
Yeah.
incentives to actually end this blockade. And as a result, it's going to cause one of the greatest humanitarian catastrophes of the 21st century. And then, to make this horrific situation even worse, further problems around the world since the invasion began have added even further fuel to the already raging fire. Fertilizer worldwide is currently in a short supply for a number of factors. Fertilizer production within the United States last year was hurt tremendously by the Great North American winter storm in February that became the costliest natural disaster in American history, as it devastated states from New York to Texas and caused nearly $200 billion in economic damages. Hurricane Ida that struck the coast of Louisiana later on in August caused even more devastation, adding a further $75 billion more in natural disaster-induced economic damage.
Yeah, I like that coming. Russia is a great country with a great history and culture that has a terrible habit of letting authoritarians in power. Fun fact, Odessa, it's a Frenchman who about Odessa, it's a Frenchman who fled the French Revolution who developed Odessa. That's why the city has a French style. Did you know that Poland is rapidly increasing their military spending to make bulwark against Russia? I knew that Germany hugely increased their budget, but I didn't know about Poland. Putting wasted the potential of the post-USSR. Yeah, they really did.
Damages to America for the year and disrupting America's production of fertilizer even further. Then, China, the world's third largest exporter of urea, a critical raw material that's used to create nitrophosphate fertilizer, completely banned all of their urea exports back in December in the wake of their zero-COVID lockdown policies. And then, following the Western sanctions placed upon Russia after their invasion, Moscow decided to retaliate by suspending all of their own fertilizer exports, which is pretty bad for the global market, because of the three main types of industrial fertilizer, Russia ranks in the top 3 biggest global exporters in all of them. Back in 2021, a total of 25 countries worldwide imported more than 30% of their fertilizers from Russia alone.
Holy crap, more than 30%. Boris Yeltsin is also blamed for that. Yeah, true. At least one country is winning. What country would that be? The problem with Russia, to be seen as stable, they need a strong leader, which films that the checks. But yeah, so let's see. We have many countries here. Nigeria, I think this is Chad, the Central African Republic, of course, Ukraine, Kazakhstan, Azerbaijan. I think it's Georgia, It's Mongolia, right? Yeah, Peru. Surprisingly, Peru and Ecuador. And most of Central America. Mexico, thank God we don't. And I think most of Europe also doesn't.
And they probably won't be getting any of that supply
that's
year.
Something.
All of this has contributed to a skyrocketing price for fertilizers worldwide, which has inevitably made the process of farming more expensive for farmers across the world and will decrease global crop yields this year. And then in India and Pakistan, the most severe spring heat wave seen in the subcontinent in more than 120 years struck in March, bringing drought and rainfall levels only a quarter to a third of normal. This historic heat wave struck during the final weeks of the wheat growing season in India, killing many of the plants before they could actually be harvested. And as a result, and in addition to the skyrocketing prices of wheat and fertilizer owing to the fallout from the war in Ukraine, on the 13th of May, the Indian government, which is ordinarily the world's 10th largest exporter of wheat, imposed an almost
one war causes a big problem around the world.
Complete ban on the country's wheat exports, with minimal exceptions. There are currently 26 countries around the world that have now issued serious restrictions on food exports, including the Russians, who partially banned their own wheat and corn exports following the Western sanctions. In total, all of these export restrictions combined from these 26 countries are currently restricting roughly 15% of all the calories that are normally traded worldwide, which I cannot stress enough will become an absolute catastrophe if it isn't.
Think about that. Okay, let's try to think about that. I think most of us live very comfortable lives, right? Maybe some of us live in poorer nations, maybe some of us live in wealthier nations, but I think most of us watching live fairly comfortable lives, right? Just imagine you eating 15% less food. That's significant. And that's not distributed equally, right? Not everyone is going to eat 15% less. The people that are going to eat less food are the ones in poor developing nations. So a lot of people are going to eat 30, 40, 50% less because of this. So it's really not, I mean, it's just, how do you solve that? How do you solve this? It's a huge problem just caused by this fucking stupid war, caused by this fucking stupid megalomaniac. You know, that's the guy, you know? Whaitifalthist is pumping videos like rabbit. Yeah. You're really right. Sudan and Ethiopia are already clashing at their border. Egypt and Sudan also have issues with the Ethiopian Nile Dam and famine to that. Yeah, by the way, that's true. Egypt and Sudan already had issues because of the Nile Dam. So I really wonder if all the food issues are gonna make it worse. Probably they will. The future looks dark for Africa and Middle East. Yeah.
Resolved very quickly. There are some creative methods that have been proposed that could help solve the problem, but they all have a number of associated cons. While increasing the supply of food this year is going to be very difficult, perhaps it would be easier to ease off
many
of the
ordinary
demand.
Russians
For example, roughly
the war.
10% of all the grains grown worldwide are currently being used to produce biofuel, and roughly 18% of all vegetable oils are used to produce biodiesel. Demand for biofuels have exploded recently as many countries around the world have tried to find alternatives to fossil fuels, but their production is having a huge impact on the availability of our finite and stretched food supply to feed the world right now. According to Grow Intelligence,
what's scary is that Putin is perfectly sane, in my opinion, and he knows exactly what he is doing. Probably, I mean, I don't know. I mean, he's either just a fucking straight up psychopath or he's insane, but either way, it's just bad.
a data firm specializing
A good way to tell how screwed you are is to ask yourself how much food you throw away.
in agriculture, the calories that are currently being diverted to produce biofuels could soon be enough to feed the equivalent of the annual needs of 1.9 billion humans. Temporarily overturning and repealing biofuel mandates across the world could therefore greatly lessen the blow from this current food crisis. But even more consuming than biofuels are animals. Last year in 2021, the Chinese alone imported a record-breaking 28 million tons of corn, which is more than what Ukraine ordinarily exports in an entire year, and it was all simply to feed their pigs. Nearly 1/3 of all the corn grown in America is simply used to feed cattle, along with roughly 40% of the European Union's entire crop of wheat. Simply cutting down a bit on the feed for the world's livestock herd for just a moment could do wonders to get us through this current food crisis.
I guess so, yeah.
But since it would inevitably
Animals
and
be eating
conversely
less.
means skyrocketing costs in meat and dairy products worldwide, it will almost certainly face enormous backlash and difficulties. Ultimately, there presently aren't really any easy solutions to this problem. One of the greatest faced by us so far in the
Greta
21st
Thunberg will be
century. The
pissed.
countries that will suffer the worst are the most vulnerable and the ones most heavily dependent upon foreign imports of food, especially the ones that are usually reliant on grain shipments coming in from around the Black Sea, like all of these ones across the Middle East, North Africa, and Eastern Africa, but most critically, Lebanon, Egypt, and Yemen.
Yeah, exactly. Unfortunately, just opposing the war doesn't do much. I think we're going to have to take constructive action. You know, I think we're going to have to do something. And we're going to have to risk it. I don't know. Maybe you guys, again, in Europe might disagree, but I think we're going to have to risk it. Because if not, we're already having rising costs of living, right? We're having problems with fuel, and he's already talking about cutting down on biofuel. And we are having problems with food. I mean, it's insane. It's either wrecking the economy of most countries or just trying to do something about the war. I don't know.
Who will each struggle to acquire alternative supplies of grain that they need to feed their populations this year. Expect that many of these countries are going to have a lot of problems and even worse instability than usual within the next 9 months from when this video was posted. This is a global problem that is the culmination of both global climate change and global geopolitics. At the epicenter of the problem, however, are the geopolitical realities revolving around the Black Sea, a body of water that has caused problems for the world's food supply plenty of times in the past. In 1915, the Ottoman Empire had joined the Germans in the First World War and used their control over the Bosphorus and the Dardanelles to block all of the grain exports from the Russian Empire, which at the time included Ukraine, from entering onto the global market. This has always been the greatest weakness of these rich agricultural fields in southern Ukraine and Russia across the Eurasian steppe. That ultimately, the best and really only way to get the massive amounts of grain that can be grown on them out to feed the hungry masses of the world can be completely blocked by whomever controls the access to this choke point, the gates to the Mediterranean. During the First World War, the Allies were so desperate to break these gates open and free up the Russian and Ukrainian grain shipments that they landed at the beaches of Gallipoli near to the Dardanelles and suffered 250,000 casualties before retreating.
Yeah, a big failure in part, to Winston Churchill. China owns $7 billion worth of Australian assets, including drinking water. I think Australia's kind of screwed, a little bit. Sadly, the war could have been addressed before the 24th of February. What we face is a combination between the consequences of geopolitics, climate change, true, and unaddressed fundamental economic issues from 2008. Yeah, I think you just summarized it, my friend. I know a mom of a friend, a Russian mom of a friend, used to be pro-war, but now she's anti because of the war crimes. What a mess. True, man. I have a Russian friend who moved to the UK as a refugee in 2009, and his father wanted to escape Russia as he was scared who corrupt it was getting and wanted my friend to have a better life. I think that was a pretty good decision.
In defeat. And now, once again, in
AC
modern
captured the
times,
canal.
NATO finds itself in a highly similar historical circumstance to the Entente powers of 1915. They must find a way to get Ukraine's enormous supply of grains out past the Russian naval blockade.
They must. They really must.
Or the world will suffer a catastrophe of unprecedented scale in the 21st century. In these times, perhaps more than anywhere else in the world,
young Russians should probably just leave, to be honest.
The largest convergence of competing global powers. And this is precisely what makes it the most unstable and one of the most strategically important bodies of water to be found anywhere on the planet. It is at the epicenter of the conflict between NATO, the United States, Ukraine, and Russia, the largely independent ambitions of an increasingly expansionist Turkey, and the recent ambitions of China's own Belt and Road Initiative that aims to use the sea as a trade bridge from Asia to Europe. Under more normal times, a massive 898 million tons of cargo passes through the Turkish Straits between the Black and Aegean Seas per year.
Could you imagine if all of this was just avoided? If Russia, after the fall of the Soviet Union, became friendly towards NATO? Things could have been great for everyone, right? The vast amount of Russian resources would have been available to everyone. And, same, Russia would have developed as a country. Russia is poor. Russia is a poor country. It's pretty much a third world country, I would say. We're a developing nation. Russians, they struggle economically. And, I don't know, things would have been a lot different if Russia wasn't in the hands of Putin, Yeah, I mean, Russia tried to be friendly. I don't know about that, man. What did I miss? Camden. Well, you missed a couple of videos. The Kraut one and this one of real life lore, which has been pretty good.
There's about 70% of the same amount of cargo that passes through the much more thought about and
The Suez
strategically
Canal,
considered
yeah.
Suez Canal in Egypt. The Turkish Straits continue to be one of the most strategically important choke points found anywhere in the world, as they have been for thousands of years now, ever since the Romans first founded Constantinople. And today, they are placed immediately adjacent to the world's most politically unstable body of water. An unprecedented 10 wars and conflicts have been fought around the shores of the Black Sea since just the end of the Cold War in 1991. More than any other body of water in the world, including the ongoing Russian invasion of Ukraine. The two wars fought between Armenia and Azerbaijan over the status of Nagorno-Karabakh. The 2014 first Russian invasion of Ukraine when they annexed Crimea and started the war in the Donbass. The 2008 Russian invasion of Georgia and the occupations of Abkhazia and South Ossetia. The previous Georgian Civil War and the Georgian-Abkhaz War. And the Transnistria conflict inside of Moldova, which happens to be the subject of the most recent
Yeah,
episode.
there we go. He's gonna, this is sponsored time, I would imagine. Yeah. Yep. Sponsored time. There we go. Wow. Oof. So shit. Well, we're pretty much screwed, guys. So we might as well enjoy life, because it's probably gonna get pretty dark soon. Great video from him as always. True, I think he's made a few videos that I haven't watched, but I should do more reactions to real life lore, you know. Eastern Europe trying not to start a world war, challenge impossible. Why can't the world have nice people? Yeah, it would have been. It just would be so much easier. Not related to the video, but a history of the United States, I guess, just came out. Oh, wait, hold up. Oh, wait. Is it from Bill? A video from Bill Wirtz? No. This is the video you're talking about? Oh, inspired by Bill Wirtz. Okay, gotcha. Not Bill Wirtz. Okay, gotcha. It's not from the same guy. I even created the necessary institution. New guy made it. Okay. Oh, shit. Yeah, I was like, oh, shit. New Bill Wirtz. Holy shit. It's like oversimplified. You know, that's like one video every blue moon. Maybe we could watch it. I mean, it sounds interesting. What do you guys think? I mean, if you guys are interested, we could. Because I wanted to watch a Whaitifalthist vid, but the problem is they are super long. And I was thinking doing a binge watching of his latest videos that are 40, 30, 40, 44 minutes, you know. I thought it was pretty mid. All right, sure. I was planning to take a trip to Western Europe in a year or so. I think I should just go to Canada and Mexico instead. Yeah. You should go to Mexico, dude, for sure. I mean, go to Cancun and then go to Canada, you know. Don't go to other parts of Mexico. You know, it's really not worth it. Okay, so, you know, maybe we could watch it, but let's just watch this video from h0ser. What do you guys think? The rise and falls and future rise of Japan. Not gonna lie, Whaitifalthist kind of fell off, in my opinion. Why do you think that is? Or why do you feel like that? Whaitifalthist is still great, in my opinion. I like Whaitifalthist, you know, especially I think I liked him more after the debate with Vosh. I don't know. Sure, let's watch this video. Whaitifalthist sounds less factual with every video he makes. It's mostly opinion now. I could see that. I mean, I think his videos are very philosophical lately. And of course, when you are talking about philosophy, a lot of it is opinion based in theory, right? So I could see why some of you guys feel like that. but I like his videos. You know, still it.
Japan is an island by the sea filled with volcanoes, and it's beautiful. Of course, with thousands of years of history, Japan has gone through.
Maybe it's because I don't really read books and stuff. Yeah, I mean, his videos lately have been very philosophical, though. So I think that's it. Why X country is doomed? I think we on a later stream we watched why the Congo is. No, sorry, it wasn't it.
Through some phases of power and decline. Their emperors rose and fell, even moving
Yeah.
capitals, and they isolated
Japanese
themselves from
Empire.
the world just because this one island had risen in power and fell.
Hello,
It
Thomas.
just so happens
Good
that
to
a
see
bunch
you,
of
man.
these phases have happened relatively recently. By recently, I mean within the last 150 years. Let's look at the rise of Japan, then the fall,
h0ser
then
is
the
so good.
rise,
Yeah,
the
he is.
fall, and the rise of Japanese power.
Rise 1, Meiji.
We start our story off in 1868 during the Meiji and Taisho periods. Japan had pretty much just woken up from a nap that lasted for 200 years, the Edo period. During this 200 years,
Isolationism.
the island was isolated from the rest of the
Yeah.
world, only opening up some ports for the Dutch. It was stable, peaceful, and flourishing in art, culture, and tradition, but the world was changing. Japan was behind, and it was time to grow. They didn't open up until the USA pointed huge gunboats at them and told them to start trading or die. Fine, said Japan, we'll open our borders. But during
How are you
this
doing? I'm
200
doing
years
great,
of
man. How are
isolation,
you
it
doing?
turns out that there was a pretty important revolution in Europe, one which was very industrial. Japan still has a feudal peasant system.
Yeah, I mean, Japan was definitely very backwards on a lot of its ways. We're talking about the 1830s, 1840s. That's in industrial world. A lot of parts of Europe are either industrial already or are industrializing. Same with the United States. So Japan was very backwards. Again, a system like this that's just very backwards, and it was time for them to sort
with
of
an
catch up.
expectedly poor population for the system. Luckily, they came out of the Edo period more urban and scientific than ever before, sowing the seeds for their next move. They had to restore themselves in a Meiji style. The
Meiji restoration, yeah.
The emperor took control back from the shogunate.
Everything's
essentially
good, just finished
military
dinner.
rule, and
Had
legislative
Indian
assembly
takeout.
was made.
Good. Indian food is so
Japan
good.
went full Western, abolishing the Edo feudal structure, replacing the feudal daimyos with prefectures, and rapid industrialization saw a boom in the new capitalist economy of the island. The average Japanese saw a huge increase in standard of life, wage, freedom, and social mobility at its highest point so far in Japanese history. Businesses were now the main producer of Japan, with the government as the guide, creating a tax reform to invest heavily into education, upholding the rule of law, the military, and infrastructure, especially railway transportation. By 1884, a central bank was created to control the money supply, creating the national currency, the yen, with the gold standard gone by 1917. Yet the biggest change was the full jump into the Industrial Revolution in the 1890s. It was fully embraced when textile factories were set up for home use and selling them to the population centers of India and China. They even had their very first union in 1897.
India gave
with
us
the Union
curry
of
and we
Metal
made
Workers.
beef curry.
Science and inventions boomed until the early 1900s. Part of this was adopting scientific methods into the military of Japan, who was a little angsty at this point. See, the Japanese government used a system called Fukoko Kyohei, which means rich state, strong army, and yes, their army was getting very, very strong. And alongside a more antsy population when they were forced to give up traditional life and move into massive urban centers, while also nearly doubling in population in 40 years, the people and military were ready to strike. The army and navy took over Taiwan in the 1870s, fought China and Korea in the 1890s, and Russia in the 1900s.
yep.
All of these, Japan took the W in. Japan forcibly took
Big
over
Japanese
Korea, opening
W.
Korea up to Japanization and industry, but mainly doing it to take their precious materials and labor from the peninsula.
Yeah, that's also pretty huge because Japan doesn't have a lot of natural resources. So when you're trying to industrialize, when you're trying to increase your income for you and your country, you gotta get some natural resources, right? So they got Korea, they got Taiwan. Korea, I think especially was the big one. Well, they also got Manchuria, right, from China, and sort of have a thought of influence with the Russians, but that comes out later, I think.
By World War I, the Japanese economy had been growing and growing, and the Japanese
India has been home
fought
for
on
like
the side of
70% of the
Allies,
world's
although they were
spices.
pretty
Yeah,
far away from any
true.
of the big fights. They gained control over the Pacific Islands from Germany and soon had the great idea to become the major powerhouse of the Pacific Ocean, an ambition which would lead to the first fall of Japanese power.
Yikes! Japanese
The
Empire.
emperor of the Taisho period is now dead. Time for a new one with
Hirohito.
Emperor Hirohito taking over for the Showa period. Hirohito liked a couple of things. He liked Japan, he liked places being Japanese, and he liked making sure some places would be Japanese, whether they liked it or not.
So pretty
The first half
fascist,
of the
I guess.
Showa period was characterized by extreme nationalism, expansionism, and militarism. Some parts of the governments had even tried to emulate certain German styles at the time, like blaming the Jews for all of their problems. Except this never really caught on since, well, there weren't that many Jews in Japan.
What the fuck,
The
bro?
unrest from extremely rapid industrialization still hadn't worn off yet, and the Japanese were still looking to influence and expand their power beyond their little island.
Imagine a world where the communist revolution in Russia was unsuccessful. Definitely interesting. An interesting world. I mean, yeah, Tsar Nicholas II wasn't a great guy, but was he worse than Lenin? You know, was he worse than Stalin? I don't know. Tsar Nicholas, I don't know, was kind of goofy and like not a great leader, but at least he didn't. Well, I don't know, dude. You know. The Russia Boyish video is about the Russo-Japanese War. Yeah, we could probably watch that instead of a long Whaitifalthist video.
The unrest only grew when the Great Depression hit. Their specialty at the time, heavy industry, was
The
hit
Russian
the hardest,
Boyish,
and it
okay.
made the whole system shrink.
I'm gonna type
By this
it in.
time, around the 1930s, the average Japanese
And
was
save it.
around 10 times as poor as the average American. Military rule grew in this time with an attempted coup in 1936 by an ultra-nationalist group trying to overthrow democratic institutions for more nationalistic,
Yikes.
fascist ones, only barely being beat
Imagine
out
a
by the
world where
Emperor's
World War
forces.
One didn't
It is
happen.
also in this time
Damn.
when Japanese rulers got paranoid. See, Japan is a relatively small island that is not resource-rich by any standard. Japan needs its colonies to build their army, cities, and nation, and they need the sea lanes open to continue Japanese prosperity and their goal of becoming the great power of the Pacific. To the leaders of Japan, most of the people who were not Japanese were seen as inferior and should be stopped trying to ruin Japan's major goals, and in 1937 this came to a boiling point. Japan invaded China, or at least Manchuria, and entered into the start of the Second World War. They did this for more territory, more resources, more area for Japanese settlement, and of course, for pride of beating the most populous Asian nation. For the first 2 years of the war, Japan was winning badly, to the point where it was less of a war and more of a massacre, but by 1939 it had become more of a stalemate.
The rape
war
of
was
Nanking.
extremely bloody and brutal even by World War II standards, with the Japanese motto, kill all, burn all, and loot all, taken to heart of many soldiers. By 19...
I mean, usually when we're talking about World War II, and we've covered many videos about it, and all of us really know a lot about World War II, but a lot of people, especially the more normie types, focus a lot on what happened in Europe, but not a lot of people look at what happened in Asia, especially in China. You know, millions and millions of Chinese people died. And of course, the rape of Nanking, a huge issue that, again, it's not really discussed that much, I think, but it's horrible. And
1940, Japan had joined the full war with Germany and
Italy and
started
Germany,
looking at
yeah.
not just China. All production in the country went
The
towards
beer-
the
the bird
military,
beat
and
the bear-
economic
the
conditions
bear.
worsened when pretty much all
Yeah, Japan was
domestic
very
consumption
brutal.
and investment
Yeah.
was cut off. Only very small
Horrible.
sections like the steel producers were better off during this war. But for this massive military to function, they still needed materials. They needed coal from China, oil from Burma and Indonesia,
Rubber?
tin
Yeah.
from Malaya and
Oh.
Indonesia, and oil from the Philippines. Hold on, the Philippines is American, and we still want the whole Pacific, said Japan. So Japan just
Pearl
surprised the US
Harbor.
by blowing up their harbor. They fought the biggest naval war ever with the US, and when their supplies reached
Midway?
their peak in 1942, they began to
Well, I mean, that was
decline.
the photo was from Iwo
During the
Jima,
later
but
years of the war, rationing, electrical outages, and bombings destroyed the lives of the ordinary
Yeah,
Japanese.
bombings,
But
literally.
despite all of the shortages of supplies, killing their people, and absolute destruction of their country, they would still never surrender.
yeah.
And again,
Have you watched The Fallen of World War II? Yeah, it's actually one of my most popular videos. Like, it has like, what, 10,000 views? It sounds pretty good. Nicholas II wasn't that bad. Yeah, he wasn't that bad, you know? I mean, he was, again, kind of a bad leader and sort of goofy, but You know, he just like wasn't. I mean, compared to what would come, you know, he wasn't that bad. Yeah, you know, the bombs.
Well, I guess that's one way to end the Japanese Empire. Time to rebuild.
The Japanese miracle.
The great thing about hitting rock bottom is there's only one way to go, baby.
Up.
And trust me, the Japanese definitely hit rock bottom during the final days of World War II. The second half of the Showa period is what some people call the Japanese miracle, maybe because it was a miracle what Japan turned into. The second rise of Japan had officially started in 1945 when the Allied powers dissolved the Empire of Japan. Germany was split up between all friends of the
But
Allies,
not Japan.
but Japan was just given to the US of A. Now, during this time, the US was less of bald eagles, guns, and freedom, and more social services, building infrastructure, and loving unions after the New Deal got them out of the Great
FDR,
Depression.
New Deal.
During their occupation of Japan, they set democracy back up, giving women the right to vote this time too, broke up major conglomerates.
Yeah, and that's the thing, because Nicholas II wasn't that bad, but he wasn't a good leader, right? And at that time, Russia really needed a good leader, right? From the Russo-Japanese War, World War I, the Russian Revolution, right? You need a great leader to survive that. And Nicholas II, he just wasn't that. He was far from that.
And expanded social services and infrastructure spending, especially on their railway.
And
Their
again,
main strategy was
kind of Japan got lucky on this time period, because imagine if Japan was divided and you had also like a North Soviet Japan and a South capitalist Japan, similar to Korea, similar to what happened to Germany. Maybe today we would have a socialist North Japan, you know? I don't know, it's interesting to think what would have happened if Japan was divided by the Allies of World War II. Yeah, same for Louis XVI. True, you know. Again, you need a strong leader to handle the pre-French Revolution times. My great uncle was captured by the Japanese in World War II. Damn. Even until his death in 2007, he struggled to trust Japanese people and got stressed when he heard people speaking Japanese. Damn, the PTSD. That's a really great story. I mean, again, PTSD. Yeah, PTSD.
to invest into rebuilding the people of Japan using their huge budget surplus from a now defunct military and using the US's military as their own. They rebuilt their industry like electricity and coal production and invested heavily into education, which made Japan a hub for technological innovation. Since they were demilitarized, Japan provided the Western nations with economic power rather than military, like during the Korean War. The US left Japan...
Oh yeah, absolutely. I actually wanted to watch that video. We'll watch it right now, okay? I'm not gonna watch a Whaitifalthist video today because they are just too long. But yeah, I'll watch Growing Up Aztecs and the ones you guys recommended about the Russo-Japanese War.
On their own in 1952 and left with them the democratic and innovative spirit. They also love baseball in Japan now from that 7-year occupation, so some culture did stick around too. The Japanese miracle marked a period where Japanese growth was 3 times as fast as American or British growth, and they did it mostly without foreign money. They achieved it through economic and trade liberalization and a massive consumer market. I mean, the post-war Japanese just love to consume, another trait from their American father. By 1955, Japan had already gone past their pre-war output levels. To develop their heavy industries in the 60s like manufacturing and mining, they started exporting like crazy, and by 1968 they were the second biggest economy on earth, at least the second biggest non-commie economy. The growth changed in the 1970s when during the 2 oil shocks, Japan was looking shaky. Japan has a huge consumer base who depends on oil, but they're a small island without a domestic oil supply, so production shrank in their first recession since the war, and Japan reduced their dependence on oil throughout the 70s and 80s, opting for natural gas and nuclear options instead. But after they continued their path of exporting technology to the world,
and culture,
now cars, electronics, computers, semiconductors, video games, shows, you name it, Japan was a full-fledged cultural exporter now, mainly through technology, becoming the largest vehicle producer on Earth in 1980.
Interesting. Russia and Japan have been having arguments recently because Japan wants land the Soviets took during World War II. It's about some islands, right? I mean, some islands north of Japan that were Japanese were taken by the Soviets. I think that's it. How do you think the aging crisis will change Japan? I mean, I think that's going to be pretty much a survival thing for them. I think Japan is a wealthy country, right? Unlike maybe some others. I think maybe they can offset some of it with, I mean, it's going to sound a little bit silly maybe, but like robots and yeah, like I forgot the word, man. I don't know what's happening with my English today, but I think they can upset something by robots, artificial intelligence, all of that. So maybe they don't have it as bad as some other countries. But yeah, it's definitely got to hit them hard. Very hard. I mean, I think we're already seeing them. Japan was supposed to have like 10, 20 trillion in GDP with that growth rate. Then economic stagnation happened. Yeah.
The 1980s were a time when Japan was booming and consumerism hit a high never seen before. Imports were growing faster than exports for the first time, and Japan signed the Plaza Accord to make the yen appreciate against the US dollar.
Wow.
The consumption-based growth had eventually become a bubble, with the Japanese stock market doubling in just a year and becoming the largest on Earth ahead of the New York Stock Exchange.
Damn.
Yen was a bubble, financial assets were a bubble, housing was a bubble, production was a bubble, many companies were overvalued, and eventually it all had to pop.
The lost decade.
The Showa period came to an end when Emperor Hirohito died in 1989, making Japan just unstable enough for the entire bubble economy to pop. It was now the Heisei period, starting off with a complete economic crash. Stock prices, housing, bonds, and production all collapsed when the bubble popped. Deflation due to prices coming down dug Japan into an even deeper hole, as companies and people chose not to spend their more valuable currency now. The 1990s have thus been called the lost decade in Japanese history, but it should really be the lost decade, since they didn't recover until 2005. In fact, ever since the 90s, the 2000s, 2010s, and 2020s are not looking too good either. Don't get me wrong, the Japanese have been living a high-income life compared to almost everywhere else on Earth, but compared to many people's vision of Japan passing the USA, it definitely didn't live up to their dream. In addition, by 2010, they've been stuck in a demographic hole that they cannot get out of.
And yeah, that's a demographic huge hole. I mean, it's fucking terrible. Yeah, automation can solve it. At least part of it. I don't know if automation can fully solve it, but in a country like Japan, an economy mostly based on services that doesn't require a huge manufacturing population. And again, that manufacturing can be replaced by automation, mostly, not all, but I don't know. Can you react to Canadiana? You should watch the history of O Canada. Sure, we can give it a watch. Again, maybe not today, but
peak population in 2010,
but definitely
every
someday.
Year since then. It makes sense. Japan has become incredibly urban due to the opportunities for people in the city rather than in the countryside, especially living in a booming technological economy. But being in the city means 1, you most likely live in an apartment, 2, you're focusing on work, and 3, you became poorer when the 1989 bubble bursted. All these factors contribute to the Japanese people not having kids, with Japan's birth rate plummeting since the 1970s, now around 1.3 kids for every woman.
Damn.
Deaths surpassed birth in 2007, cementing Japan as a dying, shrinking economy. The younger Japanese will be forced to support a much larger...
Wow, dude. Look at this. That's a fucking horrible population pyramid. You know, well, this is the 2050 model, but look, it's just an inverted pyramid, you know? The 75 to 79 will be the highest group. Damn. That is fucked up.
Older population, likely causing many industries which aren't essential to contract. Part of this will mean that Japan focuses effort inwards during this demographic collapse, forgetting the export-based industrialization and technological innovation which made them rich in the first place.
It's like the Japanese youth are under so much stress, they don't want kids.
105 million people, and by 2100 it will be at 75 million, around 125 million today. It's the big question of the future of the Japanese people. Are they ready for the collapse? So far, the country is looking bleak, with more external events thrown at them. In 1997, the Asian financial crisis. In 2008, the global financial crisis. In 2011, the Fukushima disaster.
Yeah,
and
that's pretty huge.
COVID-19 and the worst recession since World War II. So, can Japan get out of this rut? Can Japan rise again?
Rise 3, maybe?
This is the more speculative part of the video, but I say yes. Japan can get out of this mess.
Oh,
now,
wow.
There's absolutely no way to stop this demographic collapse from happening. Japan can't force everyone to start having kids, especially when there's no space for them to live in huge urban environments. Plus, even if they could, it would take about 30 years before these kids became useful and gave more than they took, so there's no way out of this crash.
Yep.
But Japan is not alone in this crash. Many other countries are also going through this. Korea, China, Russia, Germany, Italy, Taiwan, and most of the world will as soon as they are urbanized enough. The major advantage Japan has going into this crash is that they will be the first one to do it. It makes sense that the first one to crash will be the first one to recover, and when they recover,
Okay.
the leftover land and production and capital can now go to the smaller Japanese population, making everyone a little richer. Of course, this will not happen all at once, and you will not see it happening. It will happen over decades, happening in
Okay, h0ser is wrong about low population, meaning people having money to spur growth. Economics explains show wealth transfer will go from one old generation to another, unlikely to spend much.
small increments every year.
I could see
As
that.
Japan recovers, many parts of the world will be going through what they had just gone through, leaving them a much more powerful nation. It also doesn't hurt that Japan got rich, like really rich, before the collapse.
Oh yeah,
Japan
of course,
is the
yeah.
world's third largest economy with a very decent per capita income. Along with enough capital to invest in automation now, Japan can become
Exactly,
the
yeah.
first robot-based economy with most low-level jobs replaced
Yeah,
by
and that's the thing, and that was what I was sort of trying to say earlier, because Japan is not a poor country, right? So, for example, Russia really is a poor country. So when they face a demographic collapse, or even China is also like, it's getting wealthier, but it's not a wealthy nation. So when they face a demographic collapse, they are not going to have that money. Japan has money. They do have money, so they can invest in automation. They can invest in artificial intelligence. They can invest in robots, you know? So I think they should. And if they could do that, maybe they could fare better than other countries, you know, even some countries in Europe.
machines and the leftover humans to do more lucrative jobs. Compare this to a place
Yeah.
like Eastern Europe, which
Greece.
is also going through a demographic collapse,
Poland
but
even.
without this investment into automation. They will have a harder time recovering. What about all our production centers we can't automate away? I mean, it's not cheap at all to automate, and cheap labor exists outside of Japan. Well, Japan has recently started a mission to build their factories in the region they're planning on selling to. But in order to do
Thailand,
this, Japan
Indonesia,
needs safe
India.
water lanes. It gives Japan a major incentive to keep the global supply chain alive and thriving.
I mean, Japan has also recently started increasing their military spending, haven't they?
Oil from the Middle East and tin from Indonesia to supply their car factories in Africa. And the Japanese in the future will likely make sure that they can ship these materials. It's a major reason why Japan has started remilitarizing, even creating their first
there we go.
overseas base in Djibouti in 2010. If this sounds familiar, it's because this is a core Japanese problem ever since they industrialized. They need resources from outside of
I
their
like the
island.
animals,
They
true,
need
right?
sea lanes open, and soon
I
they'll
also like the animals. They give the country personality.
also need labor from outside of Japan. It doesn't hurt that because they're an island, the naval power comes naturally to them. As China runs out of steam for its own reasons, Japan might step in to take the place as the Asian power of the region. We've seen it before, and we could see it again. So who knows? Japan is a region which has historically risen to power for its willingness to modernize and adapt to change, but fallen because of their overambition trying to secure the supply chains and waterways necessary to keep that growth going. They rose again because of that same adaptation to change, this time exporting technological innovation, and fell again because of the overvalued economy of Japan, and the change required them to give up having kids. So whenever Japan can recover from their fall, it's only a matter of time before they try to secure their production lines again and place themselves as one of the great powers of the world.
Damn. Okay, so, you know, a little bit controversial, but maybe we could see a strong Japan in the future, you know? Maybe. The first parts of the UK population census came out a few days ago. The UK's population is near 68 million people. We expect 75 million by 2060 and 80 million by 2100. So it's slowing down, but overall sounds pretty good, I would say, you know, not having the same depopulation as other countries. Okay, so we're gonna watch a few videos. Growing up Aztec. We're gonna watch this. Because I'm Mexican, so of course growing up Aztec, it's kind of like a thing. And okay, so can you guys remember? Yeah, Russian voyage. There we go. There we go. Perfect. So let's watch this one first, and then let's watch Growing Up Aztec, right?
There are an abundance.
So I don't know this creator, Blue Jay, but you guys are really recommended this video right now on chat. So yeah, let's just watch it.
Abundance of iconic combinations out there, like spaghetti and meatballs, a sorority girl in a white Jeep. Or
I'm excited. You guys have been talking so good about this video that honestly I have like high expectations.
Alcoholism. But like U.S. presidents and convertibles, not everything can be a match made in heaven. And as much as Mother Russia would love to dominate the high seas, nearly landlocked nations and stellar navies don't exactly go hand in hand. But for all the Russian Navy's dismal, underwhelming, pathetic lack of glory in the early 20th century,
my man going
it's
after
always important
Russia.
to look on the bright side. Like how it gives me good YouTube content. So on today's episode, I'm going to learn you all about the misadventures of the Russian Baltic Fleet.
Very funny video. Blue Jay is really good.
It's the turn of the 20th century, and what better way to kick off a new era than expansion? Russia is cold, which is great for things like stopping Nazis and badass TikToks, but not ideal for ports. Having your port turn to ice every winter is what those of us more versed in nautical terms would call not very cash money. The Russian Empire notices China has a pretty nifty port with, get this, warm water. However, there's this pesky little thing called a border in the way. But that's okay, China isn't European, it's not a real country, so Russia takes control and gets the ching to lease in the port. Japan doesn't like what they see, so they meet with Russia and are all like,
Hey, vodka boy, invading China is our thing.
but Russia won't share, leaving diplomacy dead in the water. But that's okay, the new DLC just dropped and everyone's just itching to
Which,
try.
I mean, this wasn't unique to Russia, right? Most European countries were ignoring Japan at that time, and Japan did not like that. Russia, I guess, was the more
their new
unlucky one.
toys. So the Japanese attack Port Arthur, kicking off the Russo-Japanese War. Fast forward a few battles, and the Russians are losing pretty badly. So the Tsar authorizes quite the preposterous proposal of
Hey,
sending
Nicholas
the Russian
II.
Baltic fleet to reinforce the east. And
Which,
you may be wondering,
by the way, we didn't saw in the oversimplified video that Tsar Nicholas spent a few years on Japan. You know, interesting enough.
But
He had like a
Blue Jay, what's so
tattoo, right?
preposterous about sending reinforcements? Well, kiddo, the Baltic part of Russian Baltic fleet means it operates in, get this, the Baltic. And as we learned earlier, boats don't like ice, so you can't go this way to Port Arthur, meaning the Tsar authorized a plan for an 18,000-mile journey around the world, which is 29,000 kilometers, or 1,140,480,000 gumballs. The voyage was also a logistical nightmare, as the Russians didn't have any holdings in Africa or South Asia to refuel along the way. Add that to the fact that the fleet spent months at a time frozen in port, so the crew of mostly uneducated peasants couldn't tell you the difference between a bowline knot and a porcelain pot. This group of inexperienced conscripts is put under the command of Admiral Rozhetsvensky, a man so
Yeah,
prone
the
to
Tsar with
anger
the
that his
dragon
staff made sure to
tattoo.
keep a large supply of binoculars at the ready due to how often he would throw them overboard. But hey,
Yeah,
fuck
hold
it.
up. Let's take a look at the tattoo, you know? Do we have a photo? Yeah, it was this one, right? It's a dragon tattoo. That's badass. Okay, hold up. There we go. You know, it looks decent. I wouldn't do that, but hey.
Better way to learn than a trial by fire, right? So they set sail on their epic quest to turn the tide of the war and bring glory
Oh
to
boy,
the
this is not gonna
motherland.
be good.
And immediately the flagship runs aground and a cruiser loses his anchor. While they waited for the flagship to refloat, a destroyer forgot friendly fire was on and rammed into a battleship, prompting it to return for repairs. Don't worry, men, surely this can't be foreshadowing. As the fleet pushed on, a growing hysteria spread amongst the crew. They were afraid that at any second they'd be ambushed by Japanese torpedo boats. By Denmark. This is where the war is, if you forgot. But the crewmen didn't have time to
Wait, hold up. So basically the voyage is just starting and already like 3 things went wrong. Okay, well, yeah, foreshadowing. I guess that's right. Cool. He did it before millions of normies made it lame. True, right? Now it's like a very popular thing, but Tsar Nick and King George used to prank people by dressing up because they looked almost the same. Oh, dude, that's so cool. Fun fact, my brother and I used to do this in high school all the time.
worry about things as frivolous
Because
as
we look so
logic.
similar.
So when 2 fishermen approached the fleet to deliver a message, they opened
That's funny,
fire.
though.
The 2 fishermen survived the false alarm without a scratch thanks to the horrible standards of the Russian gunnery. As for their message, they informed Rear Admiral Rozhetsvensky that he had been promoted to Vice Admiral. Iron this. This wouldn't be the only false alarm, as later another ship signaled that she was under attack by 8 Japanese torpedo boats, only to find out that there were...
Fishermen?
0 Japanese torpedo boats. There was just nothing there. Having survived the Baltic, our heroes made their way towards Britain, where they encountered a small group of fishing trawlers at Dogger Bank. But surely by now our skittish sailors have learned their lesson. Ninjas! Streliate this bullshit! Chaos ensued as the Russians laid down hellfire upon the unsuspecting fishermen. The Russians are going bonkers. Some run around the deck aimlessly waving cutlasses to repel...
God damn, dude. Well, I mean, because they were maybe peasants or uneducated, right? Okay, hold up. Okay, you guys gave me already curiosity, so... Because I knew they were cousins, weren't they? Almost twins. The resemblance between Tsar Nicholas II of Russia and his cousin George V. They do look pretty similar, though. I mean... And also, the Kaiser, Wilhelm, was also their cousin, wasn't he? So there we go. The 3, they were all, what, the grandchildren of Queen Victoria? If I'm not mistaken. Or maybe I could be mistaken. There we go. Look. They are pretty fucking similar. Boom. Yeah, we would mix them up.
Imaginary boarding parties, while others just cuddle up on the deck with life jackets, accepting their demise.
Ha.
Keep it up, man! These Japanese have horrendous aim, Igor. We haven't even taken a hit. But, hey, at least this time we made sure they weren't fishermen first. We're shooting at fishermen, aren't we? Definitely a possibility, sir. Well, at least we didn't fire on our own ships, killing a sailor and Russian Orthodox priest.
George V could have worked on that mustache, though. Yeah, true. I mean, Nicholas II probably was more fashionable, though. The tattoo, the mustache.
The British trawler fleet were sitting ducks as their nets in the water prevented a hasty escape, and the Russians fired at them for 20 minutes before realizing their mistake. While this sounds like the setup for a massacre, you forget our heroes are about as effective as a guy holding a fish on Tinder.
So they didn't survive,
one trawler and damaging 2 of their own ships. The battleship Oriole really captured the spirit of a TikTok pickup artist, reportedly shooting 500 shots without scoring a single hit. 2 fishermen and 2 Russians died in the mayhem, so at least the survivors can brag at the local pub that they tied with the Russian Navy. This event became known as the Dogger Bank incident and nearly ignited a war between Russia and Britain. The Brits just settled for revoking their access to the Suez Canal, forcing the Russians to make a slight tweak in their course. The slow, coal-powered fleet made its way towards Africa, attacking more civilians and cutting underwater telegraph cables along the way. They met up with some German supply ships to refuel due to the aforementioned lack of African holdings to make port. What nice friends, those Germans. I'm sure their relationship will last. Africa's pretty big, almost as big as my self-loathing, so they took on double loads of coal and kept giant piles of the stuff just sitting on deck. Definitely the kind of thing to land you an EPA audit. But it's not like any sailors were going to die from black lung, except for the ones who did. Morale is low, so the Russian crew decides to lift their spirits by treating themselves to the exotic pets of Madagascar. Alright, men, you all can... Hey, Igor, stop sniffing glue for a sec, buddy. You all can go to shore and pick out one thing to bring back with you. Nothing too crazy, like snakes or crocodiles.
Oh, boy.
What did I say? Sir, I can explain. Watch it throw back the shot at Tito's. The ship became a floating zoo as the crew brought on a bunch of animals to roam the deck freely, including a crocodile and a venomous snake, which apparently took a liking for vodka. Panic followed.
Yo. I thought that was a joke. Wow. I don't really know what to say. I mean, that's so fucking stupid, but it's funny as hell, so we might as well enjoy it. Hola, ¿qué tal, Paul?
Shortly, when the snake wrapped itself around guns and bit a commanding officer, one sailor gifted the admiral a parrot, which soon took after his rather extensive vocabulary of Russian curses. The flagship soon became overrun with chameleons who would frequently go missing due to their ability to seamlessly camouflage. Hey Igor, have you seen Conrad Camo? I can't find the little guy anywhere. No, I don't think so. Have you seen him private? Yeah, I don't think he's seen him either. But a good zoo isn't complete without an underwater exhibit. And luckily for them, the cooling plant on their refrigeration ship broke down, forcing them to dump all their meat into the ocean and giving them a nice following of sharks. At one point, the fleet was holding one of many funerals for a sailor who died of illness. During the ceremony, the Kamchatka fired a gun salute. Excellent work, gentlemen. Hey, say, you boys did make sure to load blanks, right? Yes, sir. Yeah. Igor, you're looking kind of pale there, buddy. After some more shenanigans, like foiling a mutiny and receiving a shipment of fur boots and coats instead of ammo, Admiral Rozhetsvensky realized that they were approaching Japan. Ah shit, that's right, I didn't train them. So he decided to run some gunnery practice on a stationary target. Miraculously, our group of misfits managed to score a single hit on the ship towing the target.
On each other,
But hey,
yeah.
Potato, potato. At long last, the Baltic fleet closes in on Japan, approaching the Tsushima Strait during the night. The fleet extinguishes their lights to maintain stealth, all except for the Orel, which, as a hospital ship, kept them burning in accordance with the rules of war. The Orel comes upon a Japanese ship in the dark. And finally, after an extensive list of false alarms attacking fishermen and merchants alike across half of the high seas, they come across an actual Japanese vessel and determine it to be Russian. So they use their lights to communicate with it.
Hey, be careful for the other Russian vessels around me. We're sneaking up on the Japanese in the dark.
The Battle of Tsushima ensues,
Oh, no.
while our gallant sailors hold their own against the Japan. The Baltic fleet was decimated. 4,000 Russians die, with an additional 7,300 taken prisoner, compared to roughly 100 Japanese deaths. This effectively ended the war, marking the first time in history that an Eastern power defeated a European one. Way to go, buddy. Let's add that one to the scoreboard. Oh. Oh dear. So, in conclusion, the Russian Baltic Fleet's odyssey around the world is a tale full of shenanigans and blunders, with our troublemaking peasant crew racking up quite the body count of innocent civilians and friendlies before seeing an actual enemy. And yes, while they may have attacked ships from practically
And getting
every global
totally
power,
wrecked,
disabled cities'
son.
communication grids, killed fellow sailors with gross negligence of safety practices, nearly ignited a major European war, and were about as accurate as Helen Keller playing laser tag, they also taught us they could drink vodka. 9 out of 10 stars.
What the hell? All right. Wow. That was... Okay, guys. That was so funny. The part of the snake. Yeah, the part of actually getting animals. How did they even got a crocodile from Madagascar to the boat? How is that even, like, logistically? Think about it. Do 2 or 3 people grab the alligator and then... the alligator did not fight back? And the snake taking a like for vodka. I mean, wow. Okay. I wonder if there's maybe not a book, maybe a book or a documentary about this. I would love to hear more about this voyage. You know, I think that'd be hilarious. How not to run a military operation. True. Oh boy, that was good, man. That was so good. I think I'm probably gonna watch it later though. So let's watch this this video, Growing Up Aztec, and let's finish the live stream there. You know, is it cool with you guys? I would imagine so. So Growing Up Aztec by Invicta. It's a video that I've been wanting to watch for a long time. It was recommended by Jahira. But, you know, it's I guess, you know, I'm Mexican, so Growing Up Aztec, again, it sort of relates. Told you complete chaos. Yeah, true. I mean, it was really beyond chaos, though. It almost started a war between the UK and Russia. But, yeah, let's watch this video. Oh.
Welcome to How They Did It, a show where we take a look at the daily lives of our ancestors. Today we'll be joining the children of history to see what it was like growing up Aztec.
My ancestors.
A huge thanks to our sponsors, The Great Courses Plus, for making this video possible. The birth of a child was a momentous occasion for an Aztec family. Revered midwives would be present to provide their expertise and guidance in delivery. These women also carried out many of the important rituals accompanying a birth. When the baby emerged, the midwife would cut the umbilical cord, which would be preserved. Later, the umbilical cord was to be ritualistically placed in the hearth for a girl or on the battlefield for a boy. Presents would also be given to symbolize their future roles in society. Shields and arrows for boys, spindles and weaving instruments for girls. The baby was then washed and prayed over, while the midwife greeted the infant with a long speech warning of the sorrows and dangers of life. Next, a naming ceremony was carried out where the child was bathed under the early morning sunlight of an auspicious day. Babies were given a calendar name based on the date of their first bathing, along with a personal name. Calendar names were derived from the ritual calendar cycle, with each day carrying a number and a sign, such as 1 crocodile, 3 rain, and 13 reed. Each was associated with specific qualities and omens. Typically, a child would be bathed and named 4 days after their birth, but parents had some leeway to fudge the dates around a bit to get a more favorable day sign.
No one gave me a disclaimer when I was born. Shake my head. True. I mean, I wish that they told us, you know what? This world is fucked up. Ukraine is going to fight Russia. You know, there's going to be hunger. There's going to be economic chaos. There's going to be nuclear war, you know.
Personal names were less restrictive and typically found inspiration in places or things. Boys might be named after animals, clothing, or personal qualities, while girls often took on more feminine titles like those of...
By the way, if you are wondering, which maybe you're not, but in Mexico, we do learn about the basics of Aztec history, but we never learn about this. You know, we don't learn how they named the boys or the girls. We don't know all the rituals. You know, they prayed when they were born. They bathed them. They would cut and preserve the umbilical cord. We don't learn this stuff. Many people kind of forget how martial and warlike Aztec society was. True. What up, people? Last Samurai, welcome. Hello. Yeah, I mean, it was an empire, and it was a brutal empire. And they were brutal conquerors and warriors, and it was pretty, like, hardcore.
Popular flowers. Once this had been completed, 4 water rites were performed. The name was shouted out by observers, and a feast was held. In their earliest years, babies would be kept at home and attended to by the family. Parents were very careful. And
Mexicans feel closer to the Spaniards or the Aztecs. I guess depends on where you live, but I would say most feel closer to, I don't know. I would say I feel closer to the Spaniards or my Spanish culture. But a lot of people do have a lot of love for the Aztecs. So I'd say probably 50-50, you know? It's like tossing a coin. But maybe the Spanish, probably the Spanish.
Ensuring proper feeding, cleaning, and sleeping were all part of the routine, as well as several more unique considerations. One notable practice was the stretching ceremony. This occurred every 4 years and involved the pulling of children's fingers, toes, legs, noses, necks, and ears in order to stimulate growth. Other interesting customs include the following.
Okay,
Babies were to be protected from the direct gaze of an elderly person, which was believed to be quite powerful. No one must step over a child or risk stunting their growth. If it did occur, the perpetrator must quickly step back over them to undo the effect. There would be no playing outside on days with evil omens, and lost teeth were to be cast into mouse holes to encourage the arrival of permanent teeth. For the next 15 years, children would live at home with their families. During this time, they would be educated by their parents, their relatives, and their local community on how to be a proper Aztec. We will trace their aging by following a child's development year to year. At 3 years old, children wore simplified versions of adult clothing. The boys wore a basic cape without a breechcloth, and girls wore a tunic without a skirt, while both had their hair cut short.
Loved your reactions on the Turkish Century video. As a Turkish person myself, definitely enjoy those. Thank you, man. Love Turkey, love Turkish history. My mom actually has been watching a lot of, reading a lot of Turkish, Ottoman history, and has been watching a lot of Turkish soap opera. So, yeah, definitely we love Turkey in this household. Are there any people that have gone back to worshiping Aztec gods, like how some people in Europe have gone back to worshiping the old gods? No, not really. I mean, maybe, but definitely not in the same level of Europe, you know? It's insane to think that this is how your ancestors lived. It's fun to watch, for sure.
For now, they had no chores and could play much of the day.
Nice. I want to live like that.
They were increasingly instructed on proper behavior. Soon, children were expected to stop playing in the mud, to greet people properly, to listen attentively to elders, and to eat quietly. At 4 years old, gender differences became more apparent. Girls started to wear a short skirt, while boys continued rocking their capes commando style.
Yeah.
Chores now also entered the equation. girls began to take on domestic chores like spinning and weaving, while boys began to leave the house with their fathers to fetch supplies like water.
At 4
At 5
years old?
Girls progressed to longer skirts while boys continued to enjoy their freedom under the hood. Chores became more routine. Girls were taught to use a spindle, and boys returned with heavier supplies like bundles of grass for brooms and wood for fireplaces.
Damn, at 5 years old,
At
dude.
6 years old, their chores became more involved. Girls spent extensive time learning to weave and spin alongside their mothers, and boys made their first trip to the marketplace to collect supplies. At 7 years old, boys finally put on a dang breechcloth. Girls carried out tasks on their own under the supervision of their mothers, and boys ventured out on the lake to learn fishing and observe the activities of the boatmen. From 8 to 14 years old, the responsibilities of chores continued to increase year by year. Now, however, these activities started to be accompanied by physical punishment for bad behavior rather than mere verbal scolding. Magwai spines, for instance, were used to prick children who showed excessive lying, negligence, idleness, wild behavior, or other indiscretions.
Holy
Children
shit.
might also be subjected to the acrid smoke of burning chili peppers or the effects of being stretched
What?
out over damp ground all day. While these punishments may seem extreme, it's important to realize that they were not used every day. Their presence, however, does
Fuck that, dude. Damn. That's pretty brutal. I mean, we said that Aztec's culture and civilization was brutal, but damn. I find pre-Spanish conquest America so interesting. They're very interesting. They're not my cup of tea, but they're definitely very interesting. Nomadic history is one of my favorite things to learn. Definitely a lot to discover from that. True, absolutely.
Us of the high standards parents placed on their children.
I mean, this is fucked up, dude.
This was in keeping with Aztec society, which believed in obedience, honesty, politeness, respect, moderation, modesty, and energy.
I guess
as
that's
moral
cool.
ideals. An Aztec's 15th birthday was an important one. According to the Codex Mendoza, it was at this point that boys and girls would begin their full-time formal educations at school.
Interesting.
However, I want to be sure to note that other sources claim that some individuals, especially nobles, would have been introduced to the schooling system at an earlier age. After all, education was an important pillar of Aztec society. In fact, attending these institutions was compulsory. This idea of universal schooling is actually quite modern. There were several different types of schools available. These were separated into two groups, one for boys and one for girls.
Makes
The
sense.
boys were educated on matters related to their various societal roles and would take up residence in the school dormitories. The girls were mostly educated on matters related to the domestic sphere and would return home in the evenings. Past this gender divide, there would be another form of separation based on class. The Kalmikak was for elites, while the Telpushkali was for commoners. The Kalmikak was a religious temple where youths would be taught to occupy the highest positions of authority in society. Admission was generally reserved for those of noble birth, but it is believed that boys from the merchant class or gifted commoners might be received as well. While in school, students would dress as novice priests with blackface and body paint. Advanced students are depicted with additional red marks by their ears, a stylistic representation of typical auto-sacrifice wherein one would prick one's ears to draw blood. Lessons here were taught by wise elders or priests and covered a wide range of topics. These
I think I also read somewhere that the Aztecs, before founding their empire, were a nomadic tribe from northern Mexico who migrated down to central Mexico. I'm not entirely sure about that. I'm not sure if they were, well, honestly, I don't know. I'd have to check on that.
included religion, history, painting, music, law, astrology, astronomy, warfare, and a high form of language. Some of the students in the Kalmikak specialized in craftsmanship, starting off as an apprentice and eventually reaching the status of master. Between lessons, students would continue their chore work and assist.
Okay, well, The Last Samurai, 10 years, thank you. Keep up the good content, bro. Love it. Thank you so much. I really appreciate the donation. Thank you so much. Really, really appreciate it, man. And yeah, for sure, I'll definitely keep up. Definitely will keep improving, making original content soon. So thank you so much. Really, really appreciate the dono, man. Thank you so much. I even became a little blush and everything. I don't know if you can see, but I'm blushed.
fetching firewood, and decorating or maintaining holy sites. Many religious practices would also be observed, such as the nightly burning of incense in the 4 cardinal directions. Novices would also trek to the mountains with priests for penance and sacrifice. Additionally, elder boys had a chance to accompany the warrior priest to the battlefield. This was all done
War
with a high
was a
level
huge
of
part
austerity
of the
and discipline.
Aztec society.
Students were expected to perform daily tasks diligently, show proper manners, fast routinely, and remain chaste. Breaking these rules would result in strict punishment, which might even include execution.
Damn. What?
The Telpochcali schools for commoners
The school
were more
for
numerous
commoners.
than their elite counterparts, and were present in every neighborhood. Their primary focus was military training. Here, students would be taught courage, order, discipline, and battle skills by respected elders and military veterans. This might be done with general physical tasks, such as public work projects, or through specialized lessons on martial arts and weapons training. Direct exposure to the Aztec military in action was also a key feature of their education.
Yeah. So the Aztec Empire started where now is Mexico City, right? Modern Mexico City. And they would expand to most of central and parts of southern Mexico. So in reality, they were an empire focused on conquests. So that's why you will see that a lot of the boy tasks or the tasks for men would be strictly focused on war, because that's what the thing, they had a straight up focus on the military and conquest. And that's why the Spanish couldn't defeat the Aztecs so easily, because they were warriors and they pushed back, and the Spanish had to ally with other Mexican tribes to defeat the Aztecs. So the Spanish really didn't defeat the Aztecs alone. The Aztecs had so many enemies that eventually those enemies would come bite them in the ass later when the Spanish arrived. And the Spanish, together with those tribes, would defeat the Aztecs, and Tenochtitlan would fail. That's fairly common. The Ottomans started out as a tribe in the former Eastern Roman Empire that became more technologically advanced than the other tribes and managed to conquer their neighbors. True, that would happen. No problem, brother. You definitely deserve it for you. Oh, thank you so much, man. I really, really appreciate every bit of support, and I really just appreciate it.
Youths would first participate in campaigns by accompanying troops to the battlefront as porters. In time, they would have had a chance to distinguish themselves, making their way into battle and potentially advancing to...
The Mayans are also another interesting civilization. If I'm not wrong, I think there are still people related to them living in southern Mexico. Yeah, they are probably one of the largest native ancestries in Mexico, and there's a lot of people that speak that language. So there's not language that really is called Aztec, but there is a lot of people that speak Mayan, especially like in the Yucatan Peninsula. And actually, there was a point in time where the Aztecs and the Mayans could have met, They could have met and probably have war to control in Mexico. Of course, that didn't happen. The Spanish arrived and, they never met. Or they knew of each other, sure, but they never, had a lot of contact with each other. Same for the Franks, for example. They only used to be a Germanic tribe, exactly.
Through the various ranks in the army.
It happens a lot. The Italians,
War-making,
right?
however, did not come to the complete exclusion of all other academic interests. As with the School for Nobles, the School for Commoners would also introduce students to various aspects of Aztec religion, culture, and law. The quality of education
law, yeah.
would likely
They had
have varied
law.
from
They
school
had
to school,
taxes.
but most likely lagged behind that of the nobility. This more relaxed teaching style also manifested when it came to school punishment. While all students were expected to adhere to specific rules and customs, the commoners were not as strictly punished for breaking them as compared to their more elite peers, who were held to a much higher standard. With all this activity taking place within each individual school, we should not forget that there would actually be many institutions within a city, all of which interacted with their neighbors. School rivalries were a real thing. This was especially the case between the noble and commoner institutions.
And if you can see a lot of these names, Coyoacán, Iztapalapa, Chapultepec, these are all names that you can find in Mexico City. So this is all Mexico City, right? This is modern Mexico City. Of course, there's no water, right? Mexico City, if you've heard Mexico City was built on a lake, this is the lake. This is the lake Mexico City was built upon.
Each of which were associated with separate gods. Great prestige could be had through the ball game competitions or mock battles. specifically during the third day of h0ser, when the mock battle of Chonchayot was held. The Kalmyk and Telpoch...
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, the Ottomans managed to achieve stability whilst other tribes weren't as stable and basically played crusader kings, schemed, etc., and married the right people to gain more influence and power. Yes, you're absolutely right.
Gali youth would square off with bound bundles of staves. If a Kalmyk youth was caught, his body was rubbed with ground-up Magwai spines as a sort of itching powder. If a Telpoch Gali youth was caught, his ears, shoulders, chest, and thighs could be pierced with Magwai thorns.
Yes, exactly. Some Spanish said Tenochtitlan looked like Venice because they could not believe it. Yeah, they had a lot of canals, and if you saw the diagram on the lake, there were a lot of ocean canals. Well, not ocean, lake canals, right? And they really specialized building crops on the lakes. I forgot the name, but they built crops on the lakes. And it was like a huge innovation for the time. The Aztecs really looked like the Romans of the Americas. Probably they were, they were really advanced.
Each group
and they developed laws,
a base, a temple,
and taxes,
which the winning side.
The militarism reminds me of Prussia.
Boys and girls
interesting comparison. Yeah, I could see that.
Pillow fights with the boys throwing grass-filled sacks and the girls chasing after them with cactus thorns. At the end of the day, though, differences would be put aside at the House of Songs, where communities came together to sing and dance the night away.
Huh.
Much socializing was to be had, and many lifelong friendships were formed. In their late teens, Aztec children would graduate from school and enter society as adults. For girls, this meant remaining in the temples or getting married and continuing to work in a more domestic environment. For the boys, graduation typically meant the beginning of their careers as warriors. As such, they would be mobilized for campaigns when necessary and return to typical day jobs such as farming, fishing, or craftsmanship while at peace. I'm really happy to have been able to share the experiences of growing up Aztec. Traditional history lessons focus so much on the activities of adults that we never get a sense of what it's like to actually be a kid in the past. We cherish our own childhoods so much that it's only fair we do the same with our ancestors. I think this exercise is particularly important with people like the Aztecs, who otherwise find themselves so easily passed over when it comes to more flashy topics like sacrifice and warfare.
True.
If you'd like to find out more about the Aztecs and other Mesoamerican civilizations, you can do so through our sponsor, The Great Courses Plus.
The Great Courses Plus, that now I think it's Wondrium. It has a different name. So yeah, whatever, right? Bulgaria, Byzantium, and Serbia were first hit by the plague, while the nomadic Turks much less, and also fought each other and themselves. The Ottomans first came to the Balkans as mercenaries. Basically, the Ottomans took Adrianople when the Byzantines couldn't pay them. Exactly, the Byzantines had so much debt that time. They couldn't pay it back. That was interesting. Oh yeah, for sure. Especially, as a Mexican, there's some things that I didn't knew or some things that I did knew and could add a little bit of context. Either way, it was super cool. I'm probably gonna share it with some friends and family members, to be honest. Like, look, this is what... Could I say our people? I don't know. By the way, guys, I found there is an ancestry test, a DNA test, that ships in Mexico, and I could, do it and send it back. So I really wanna do that. I don't know where I'm gonna buy it, but probably soon enough. I don't know, maybe between the next month, I'm going to be buying a DNA test, and for the first time in my life, and I don't know what's going to show up, but probably around 30%, I calculate it's going to be Native American, probably Aztec, maybe, who knows? Although maybe it's going to show some interesting things, I think that is cool. It's meant that there's people alive today that were alive when the Ottoman Empire existed. True. You don't learn much about being a kid in history. That's exactly right. Most of history is focused on adult, not really growing up. Yeah, the Ottoman family is still alive today. Their hair today has a son and a daughter to this day. Wow, that's interesting. Sort of reminds me of, I think the Romanovs also have family. I think the Bonaparte family also has living members. The Aztecs were like the Assyrians of the 1400s Mesoamerica. I was reading about the late 6th century Italy when the Germanic tribe, the Lombards, invaded Italy. The Lombard king killed another barbarian king and used his head as a drinking cup. Damn. Yo, how you doing? Hello, brother. I mean, the stream is almost about to end, but hey, you could. I'm glad that you, pass by, say hello. Really appreciate it. The Hohenzollern, the Prussian royal family, is also still around. Oh, really? Damn, I actually did not knew that family. So Romanovs, and the Bonaparte, the Ottoman family. I'm kind of late. Yeah, man. Nah, but it's okay. You're good, man. The Hohenzollerns, I really didn't know. I'm probably going to be looking more into that. But anyway, guys, really, really appreciate the support. This was a really fun stream. One of my favorites. I'm going to have to change the title and the thumbnail because we didn't watch Whaitifalthist. Yeah, the Ottoman family is mixed, like hella. They're definitely going to be looking more around. The Austrian royals are still around. It's interesting how a lot of this a lot of the royal families are still around. Like it's a weird thought. Of course, monarchies were overthrown, and they're not monarchs anymore. But the families are still living around. Probably they're even still living from the riches of their times. Who knows? There's a video called "Who Would Be the King of Germany Today?" If you want to learn more. Yeah, man, thank you. I'm actually probably going to be watching that when I have free time. Right now, I got to go and do some things, but probably going to be watching that tonight. I just finished my favorite anime, and now I'm sad. No, but thank you for coming by and say hello. Really appreciate it, man. Like a wise man said, do not be sad that it finished. Be happy that it happened. True. And this was a great stream. So, you can watch back the VOD, and, it was a really cool stream, man. The Ottomans did have harems, so not surprising. Yeah. I would imagine that. Yeah, harems were very normal within the Ottoman royals. Well, anyways, guys, again, appreciate the support. Thank you for this amazing stream. It was super helpful. Thank you for, the chatters that you guys really make the stream so much better, so much funnier. I appreciate the support. Thank you, Last Samurai, for the donation. Again, super, super appreciate that. And I'll see you in the next stream. Probably the next stream, we're going to be binge watching Whaitifalthist. So if you're interested on that, be tuned. Maybe 4th of July, 4th of July, that's a special American holiday. I think probably we're going to be doing some Whaitifalthist, a 4th of July stream. So, without further ado, thank you, and I'll see you later. Peace out, guys. Thank you all.